don't like those.
Hello, good evening, welcome. Wow. All right, I'll call the special city council meeting of June 17th, 2024 to order. The time is 6 o'clock. And we're going to have our captain lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Ready to begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Captain. All right, Madam City Clerk, will you please call roll?
Councilmember Duncan.
Here.
Councilmember Garner.
Here.
Councilmember Thorpe.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Venable.
Here.
Mayor Beaver.
Here.
All present.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, moving on to our only agendized item this evening. This is the financial strategic plan. Mr. City Manager, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Good evening. Thank you all for being here tonight. For those of you who have attended city council meetings in the past or watched on the live stream, the format tonight's going to be a little bit different. It is because we have the whole city council here, technically a city council meeting. So we did roll, there's an agenda, we'll be taking minutes. There are some formalities by law that we have to follow. There will be a staff presentation tonight, followed by discussion between staff and the council. But then we'll go into more of a town hall style discussion, a much more free-flowing discussion than what you may be accustomed to with city council meetings. And what we're really trying to accomplish here tonight is a community discussion on the state of our budget. I'm sure all of you saw recently that Tom Brady was just inducted into the Patriots Hall of Fame. And he gave a speech that it was really quite inspirational, probably one of the best that I've seen with these ceremonies. But one of the overriding themes was that no accomplishment, no significant accomplishment happens by the efforts of the individual alone, right? That we all get there together. And that's kind of the purpose of this process, that we come together as a community and together work on solutions. Now, I know this is how rumors get started, so let me clarify. I grew up in Dallas. I'm not a Patriots fan. I won't say who I am a fan of, although you probably have figured it out already. It's not my fault. I grew up there. But we are facing, as a community, a pretty significant budget challenge. And we've been talking about this for approximately a year. I started here in March of last year. In May 23rd of last year, we had a kind of an emergency budget workshop here in this building, May 23rd, and we raised this issue. And we let the community know that, look, we've got a problem coming. It's not a dire emergency today. It wasn't a year ago when we had the meeting. It's not today. We're not out of money, but we have a significant structural deficit, which means that our ongoing expenses exceed our ongoing revenue. And while it's not a crisis today, if we don't solve for the problem soon, we will get to that point. So today we want to talk a little bit about what the problem is, how we got here, and then identify potential solutions to the problem. We're going to start with the finance department. We have our finance director, Phil, here, and Ryan also from the finance department, our assistant city manager, Jennifer Crawford, who can provide some perspective on history as well. We'll get through the presentation part, and then we'll engage in dialogue. So with that, I'll hand it over to our finance director, Phil White.
Thank you, Chris. Evening, Mayor, members of City Council, and Yucaipa audience, residents. Let her rip, Anna. Okay, so we're going to kick off tonight with a little bit about the cost side of the challenge. So fiscally, Yucaipa is is
Phil?
on an unsustainable trajectory.
Phil, if I could ask you to get a little closer to the microphone, sir. Yeah, thank you.
Better? Better. Oh, yeah, I can hear it. We won't go quite this far back, but in the 20s, there was a writer, Ernest Hemingway, and one of his characters was asked, "How did you go bankrupt?" And the character's name was Mike Campbell, but he responded, "I went bankrupt two ways, gradually and then suddenly." The continuing structural deficit that Yucaipa is experiencing that's chewing up our accumulated resources puts us in the same type of trajectory. We're going to have a similar impact. It's happening gradually, and eventually it will happen suddenly. We're going to cover a few slides tonight, but the aim of those slides is to clarify the city's costs of doing business. And we really have options. One of the good things that we have is, while it's happening gradually, we're raising flags. Flags have been raised over the course of time. This is a bigger flag, but we have options. We're not out of time. We have options. We can ultimately, the three main options are either we raise revenues to meet the cost of providing services at the levels they are. The other extreme would be we cut service levels to what existing revenue streams are. We match those up. And then the third option would be meet in the middle somewhere. But those are the three big ones. We're going to cover quickly about 10 slides that kind of walks us through the guidelines of what we're looking at, how we costed, what it costs for the city to deliver the services, and kind of put the guide rails on the discussion. The first part of this discussion is really going to be focused on existing costs and how those are quantified. Okay, starting with this slide. This is a familiar slide to the city council and those that attend the meetings. But this is a 20-year fund equity slide going back to 2003, a little over 20 years. And what this shows is, regardless of the spending bucket, the equity, assets minus liabilities, those balances in each of the year over the last 22 years. And so you can see right in there at 2003, we had a healthy reserve, and for these 4, 5, 6, 7 years, we had surpluses every single year, and these are citywide again, not just general fund, every fund of the city, all wrapped together. Starting in 2009, we start this trajectory all the way down to where we are now. All these numbers are based on, these are all actuals, audited financial statements over the course of time. Our most recent audit was 2023. We haven't gotten to our 2024 audit yet. The fiscal year ends on June 30th. So this box right here is identifying for everybody that these numbers are actual audited numbers. These are projected. So in 24, they're estimated actuals. And then in fiscal 25, those are budget numbers. And one piece of information here with the budget numbers is that we have capital carrying over from year to year. So the capital budget does not lapse. If we don't complete the project, whatever remaining budget is with the capital rolls into the next year. Right now, we're close to $30 million of rolling capital, and so that gets added on every budget year. So you may have heard we've got a $7.3 million deficit, operating deficit this year. That cliff right there indicates a much deeper dive than 7.3, and that's because the capital that's rolling over gets added on top of whatever's not complete, gets added on to the following year. Again, this is a slide that council is very familiar with. To ramp up that graphic a little bit.
Phil, I'm sorry, could you go back one slide? Can you touch on, in 2020, the bump up there?
Yeah, right here, this bump up. Okay, so an interesting thing happens. This is all spending, operating, and capital. So, and these are net differences between revenues and expenses. So the spending down is a strategic plan of building stuff, infrastructure, citywide infrastructure. We're spending down the reserves of the city. And we're in a pretty steep dive right there. In 2020, we were wrapping up spending on the YPAC, this awesome facility that we're in right now. And what came in, this valley right here that spikes up, is not that we fixed our problems, it's that a lot of the capital for the YPAC, there was a big reimbursement process that was in the works for a couple of years. And so two things happened right here. One is we got a big reimbursement from the capital side that increased our revenues that year, and the other was ARPA. As we entered COVID, there was a lot of federal money that was available to municipalities, and all that started flowing in 21, 22, and 23. So this bump up here is not that we fixed our problem, it's that our problem was masked with free money coming from the feds. That money has now run out, and so part of the issue now is last year we had $3 million of ARPA. This year it's gone. And so we lost that money too. So from a trend standpoint, you can think, hey, something really cool happened there, but the only cool thing was COVID, and we got money. So turns out it's not so cool. Okay, this is the same, well, it's a similar graphic. The white line is that water line that we just saw. So instead of everything below it being blue, equity, what we did here is we added spending levels. And so it's a little bit confusing, but I'll walk through it briefly, and I think it adds a lot of context into how the city spends money. Basically, each one of those bars is a different type of spending. Starting from the bottom, the brown bar is capital. That's our capital spend every year, and again, that's actual numbers. I did not add 25 because from a budgetary standpoint, because of that rolling capital issue that we have, it's very difficult to project what the capital spend is in any one year. But bottom line is capital. The thin blue line is public safety. And so you can see going way back here to 2003, that was the public safety spend. Over here, that's what the city spends on public safety. This bar right here, the tan color, is development services, which I call it development services, but it includes things like community development, public works, engineering, all of that stuff is all wrapped, building and safety is all wrapped up into that one. The, what color is that, purple? Magenta. The magenta bar is community services. Community services, we'll get to a slide that shows all the different things that community services does, but that is what is spent on community services, special events, the YPAC, youth programs, sports, there's much more, a laundry list of what community services does. And then at the top, this lime color is general government, which I've been referring to as our support function. This function, what they do is when community services says, hey, we're gonna have an event, here's all the vendors that we need to pay, here's all the information technology demands that we've got, here's all, whatever they're doing, that line bar is supporting the endeavors of what's going on, everything below it. Capital, public safety, development services, and community services. That's the support team right there. This black bar is our revenue over the same period of time. So you can see right, as our revenues are above the graph, that's when we have surpluses. Once it crosses over, that's when that white bar starts dropping. And our trend is revenues are growing, which is great, but the expenditure growth is outpacing revenues. That's our sustainability problem. But you can kind of see how the city spends money over the course of time, how it's changed. Back here, when the strategy was, hey, we're accumulating resources and we need to spend, we need to build infrastructure in Yucaipa, we need City Hall, we need the community park, we need drainage facilities. That spending occurred and ramping up happened on the capital side. There's the YPAC spend right in there. But operating, back here, you can see how thin these bars are. There was no structural deficit back then. As those bars get thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker, now even if the capital goes away, we've got a structural deficit where recurring revenues are not sufficient to cover the recurring costs. Again, this graph is not just general fund, this costing is based on all funds combined, citywide. All right, we'll look at these a little bit different, and we'll jump through these slides pretty quickly, but this is similar information, just in a pie chart form. And so this is based on our most recent audited financial statements, fiscal 23. And this is the expenditure split of net costs. You may say, what are net costs? So if we looked at on a full accrual basis, which is an accounting term for everything citywide wrapped up together and costed over the full accrual method, we have citywide costs, expenses of $52 million gross. Net cost is that $52 million minus related revenues. And so some of the functions that we perform have revenues tied to them. Community services may have a special event, and there may be revenues associated with that special event. So the cost of putting on that event minus the related cost would be the net cost of that. That equals $27 million in 23. And again, these are audited financial statements available online if you so choose. Of that 27 million, this is the way that it's split out at the city. 69% is public safety. 10% is development services. 11% that fiscal year was general government and community services. I'm colorblind, it doesn't help. 11% was community services and 10% was general government. Of that $27 million net cost, the city received that fiscal year $29 million of what we call general revenues, property tax, sales tax, intergovernmental revenue, investment income, things like that. All wrapped up, we got $29 million. So of our net cost of 27, we had a $2 million surplus citywide with those general revenues. That means what it means, but once we start benchmarking other places, we can see if that's how we're doing. One other thing that we're going to benchmark is general revenue per capita, $538 per resident is what the city brought in 23, and then total cost, the 52 million per capita is $971. That means what the city spent per resident. $971 is what we spent, 538 is what we brought in. Those metrics could be good, could be bad. Let's look at 4 other places that we benchmarked. And there's reasons why we benchmarked these. This one is Beaumont. I was going to protect the names, but I decided not to. This is also 23. All the audited information is available online. 23 is the most recent information available. So for Beaumont, the reason I benchmarked them was gross cost was $55 million, really close to our 52, and then our net cost was exactly the same, $27 million for Beaumont. We had 27 also. Beaumont, one key difference as we're looking at those metrics, their general revenues were 60, ours were 29. Beaumont has twice as much general revenue as we do, and so their general revenue per capita is $1,000 per person, and they're spending similar to what we spend per person, $934. I think we were at $970. But the reason that you don't hear Beaumont has a structural deficit is because that general revenue number, they get $60 million. Of that, half of it is sales tax, $30 million of sales tax for Beaumont, and we get 5. General revenue per capita is 1,000. Ours was in the 500s. So that was the benchmark for on the cost side. On the net cost side, you can see Beaumont has a totally different mix than what we have. 64% goes to public safety, 36% goes to general government. Full disclosure, that general government includes interest on long-term debt. Beaumont has a lot of debt. Yucaipa does not, and I just put all that interest into general government. Also, you can see 0 net cost on development services for Beaumont this year and 0 net cost for community services. Each one of those functions was actually a net revenue. They brought in more on those functions than they spent. So totally different than what Yucaipa does. Even though the total they spent the same and their net cost was the same, they get way more money, and their spending mix, they don't provide the services that Yucaipa does. Our next comp is Highland. The reason I comped Highland is because the general revenues are very similar to ours. We're at 29, they're at 25. They have $16 million of property tax, we have 15. They have $5 million of sales tax, we have 5.5. Very similar on the revenue side. Their gross costs and net costs are slightly less, but you can see their general revenue per capita, $437, a little bit less than us, and their cost per capita is about $250 less than ours. The reason for that is because of this spending mix. Check this out. Highland spends, they provide public safety. That's what they do. Very limited development services, very limited community services. Everything they spend is they just fund public safety. That's it. So they have an 8% general government, which includes they make contributions to the YMCA to run their recreation programs. It includes that. Their cost of administering those public safety contracts is all calcs to 8%. But from a revenue, bringing in revenue and providing services, Highland took a totally different, has always taken a different approach than Yucaipa. They said, we're sticking to public safety, that's all we're doing. Whereas when we saw that graph over the course of time, Yucaipa made the strategy choice to build infrastructure, to build these facilities, and as those things happen, the cost to operate and maintain those things goes up and up and up. So even if tonight we said, I like that idea, all we want to do is public safety and nothing else, Yucaipa does not have that opportunity right now because we've already built the infrastructure, it already exists, and we still have to maintain it, we still have to have the cost to maintain those things. So it's a comp from the revenue side, from a spending mix side, totally different. From a geography side, across County Line Road, we've got Calamasa. The key takeaway there is all the costs and the revenues are roughly a third of Yucaipa. You can see their general revenue per capita is significantly higher than Yucaipa's. And so they get more per capita than Yucaipa does. The cost per capita this year was $1,422. One thing with Calamasa is it fluctuates. It's a newer city and fluctuates each year. This one, they had a significant capital asset addition that was going into that, so that kind of skewed this graph. But you can see 54% public safety, 14% on that's actually community services. But a lot of their community services, they're partnering with Yucaipa to provide the community services for their residents. And then 33% on the general government side. The last one comp that I wanted to cover was this one, Orange. And that one's not in our location. It's I don't know, 45 minutes away. But the reason I wanted to comp this one is because I don't know if you guys have been reading any articles about municipal finance lately, but some of those things, I mean, if you change their mayor's name to Mr. Beaver, you can almost see him saying a lot of the same things that the challenges that they're dealing with are challenges that we're facing. Their spending mix, their dollars are much higher, but their spending mix is very close. 68% public safety, 6% development services. Their city's a lot more built out than Yucaipa is. Smaller geographic area and not a lot of open space that they're dealing with. 12% on the community services side and 14% general government. Their costs are 4 times what Yucaipa's are. Their revenues are 5 times what Yucaipa's are. Their costs and revenues per capita are different. But one interesting thing, and the reason I pulled this as the comp is they're dealing right now with a structural budget deficit of, they said they were able to whittle it down to about $10 million. They're having discussions on what do we cut? What's the priority of funding these things? They just recently came out and said, we can't get there, we're going out for a sales tax measure. They're having very similar conversations. I chuckled. Some of the things that they're contemplating are they're tough choices. I mean, at last meeting, we went through all of the costs that the city incurs, and there's tough choices. There's noble causes that need to be funded, but not enough money. This place has been around a lot longer than Yucaipa. Their spending mix is so close to Yucaipa. The challenges they see, the issues with funding, almost identical. So we're not alone in this. It's not a good place to be, but we're not alone. There's this place also. They said we're fiscally conservative. We're not crazy like those people in Santa Ana. We don't do crazy things. How are we in this? How are we in this? How did this happen? And the reason this happened, I can tell them it happened gradually and then suddenly. It's something that if you're not in tuned and projecting into the future to see, here's our trends, these things just kind of pop up, and whoever's sitting in these chairs at the very end has to deal with that problem. But it doesn't happen one day, it happens over the course of time. All right, we'll quickly go through this one, but what I did want to point out is our 3 service lines. These are our costs, and so when we say, how do we cut costs? What can we do? This is how we spend money. Public safety, in this year's budget, we've got $23.5 million. Most of it is in public safety contracts. We also have a public safety division that has salaries and benefits in it. We have some operating costs in that division as well. We also, under public safety, have facility maintenance in our public works department. And then from a full costing standpoint, whatever that number is, we say, okay, we're adding 20% as a support services, general government support. We don't incur that. Our number citywide is 9% currently, but from a costing standpoint, the cost of doing business, rule of thumb in the industry is a Yucaipa-like structured city. That support level, general government, is 20%. And so when we're looking at costing, what's it going to take to fund public safety? We're saying whatever our known costs are, we can estimate 20% is the cost to support. And that 20% you'll see is in each service line. Technically, when we look at public safety and we say, okay, the biggest piece is the contract, how much is it really to support the contract? We're probably less than 20 on the public safety side. Probably, we are less than 20 on the public safety side. These other functions are more support intensive, and so we're probably a little over 20%, but citywide, 20% is a great benchmark. Jumping over to community services, this is the laundry list of what they do. Senior services, special events, sports, stars, teen programs, the YPAC, aquatics, camps, the community center, crossing guards. Crossing guards was the city of Orange in their most recent article. That was one of their key fixes to their budget challenge was they're gonna take a closer look at their crossing guard program. I don't know what they spend on their crossing guard program, but that's not an option for us. That's not gonna fix our problem. Over on the development services side, these are our departments: community development, building and safety, code enforcement, economic development, and planning. We've got an engineering department, and then public works deals with parks, facility maintenance, and street maintenance. Those are our spending buckets. If we said, hey, we want to cut salaries, each one of these service levels has salaries in it. Our support services also have salaries in it. It's important to remember from a strategy standpoint, 20% is our benchmark. Fiscal 25, we're at 9% on the support side. If we wanted to cut support costs, the way we do that is to say, all right, what service level are we not supporting? And we're gonna whittle down that service level, and then the pie shrinks. So if we have a pie that's saying it takes 20% to support that pie, we can cut the 20%, the dollar amount of the 20% by shrinking the pie, and then the 20% is smaller. That's the way we get there. There's been some questions on the tool that we'll get to in a second about why aren't the support costs included, and that's the reason why. If you want to cut support, chop the pie first. And these I'll just go through really quick. Just a reminder of what we talked about last Monday night. This is the general fund and the fire fund. This is how we fund public safety. We make a big transfer to backfill police services from the general fund. That's the $14.8 million. A backfill for fire services is a 2.6 million. And then that all goes into the public safety fund. And we've got some what we call native revenues in that public safety fund as well, about $6 million. And that's how we fund public safety. Last slide on the cost side. Really what we're looking at if we're saying we want to solve this on the cost cutting side, we want to think of two things. One is, as a community, do we like the service lines that the city has? Public safety, community services, and development services. Do we like those service lines? Do we like them enough to fund it? Then the second thing is based on the details of those service lines, do we like the service levels, what they're doing, and the extent of what they're doing? Do we like those enough? And do we like those enough to fund it? And if there's a whole lot of context into those questions, but ultimately we can't the full costing of what we're looking at now, the costs exceed our revenues. And so the change to be sustainable in the future is to either provide less or to bring in more. There's a tool that our Government Affairs Department had put together, and our PIO, Joe Prodetto, I think is next up.
Mayor and Honorable City Council, Joe Prodetto, Director of Governmental Affairs. And you may have seen that we recently launched a tool. So everything that Phil has been talking about, we tried to approach with an idea of how can we conceptualize it for the council and the public to see what it is that you have to struggle with in this process. And we wanted to make it interactive and visual. We wanted to be able to put you and, more importantly, the residents in the driver's seat to approach the problem and see how they would solve it. We developed this tool, which has a series of revenue options and cut options, with the goal of coming up with a $10 million financial fix. The $10 million financial fix is set at a point that if we can reach it, it'll help not only get us out of next year's deficit, but also put us on the trajectory for a long-term solution. The key in making it visual is seeing that this $10 million fix requires a full fix. You can't just take something out you don't like without replacing it with something else. So, with that in mind, we launched this tool. It's now live for the public. We've gotten quite a bit of feedback. It stimulated a lot of conversation online, which was the point. We wanted people to see what's going on. And I'll walk you through it briefly here to kind of see how it works, and for those who have not seen it. You're presented with a series of revenue options. There are questions on why we selected these specific revenue options. Corey, our management analyst, reviewed various comprehensive revenue options for various jurisdictions. And we narrowed that down to the most viable and impactful revenue options. Viable being, is it something that is politically palatable? Is it impactful, meaning that it actually moves us towards a solution? Because there are a lot of solutions that the colloquialism, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. So we were looking for those things that provided the most return, and this is what we've come up with. In terms of cost cutting, we took that same approach, and we thought, what are those things, those cuts that would yield the most significant savings? Some of the questions that have come up is, why is development services not on this list? As Phil pointed out, development services aren't on this list because they're generally funded by revenues, fee revenue, and special revenue through gas tax, development impact fees, things like that. Also, our development services team had taken the effort this budget season to take a look at their capital projects and reprioritize them. So development services isn't on here because there's not a significant impact on the general fund. That leaves, of the three service lines, public safety and community services. So some folks have asked, why are we focusing primarily on public services and community services? And the reason is because those are the service lines that have the biggest impact on the general fund. We did not put specific line items for cutting general services because, as Phil pointed out, we need people to count beans, to sign contracts, to do compliance work. That doesn't go away, and it only grows as a function of the service line. So with that, we put this tool together, and folks can go through and they can select how they want to fix the problem. For instance, if somebody was filling this out and they liked the services that the city was offering and they didn't want to cut the services, they wanted to maintain the service level, they could go through and perhaps select a 1.5% sales tax and, maybe even do something like a cannabis tax, and you'd reach your goal. And then we would preserve and have no cuts to public safety or community services. Alternatively, if somebody wanted to come through and cut their way out, we must see, did we miss one? So it looks like there's a bug we'll have to fix. Something's not adding up right. It's coming to 6.8, but when you total it, it should be about 9.7 million in cuts. So even if you cut everything that we've looked at, there's still a small gap that you have to make up through revenue. And the consequence of that is serious reductions in safety and community services. And I will address some of the questions that we've received on community services in particular, because some folks have asked, well, what if we cut specific events and then maybe that would help solve the problem? You can see how we've done, quote unquote, strategic programming. We do that because community services recovers about 70% of its expenses, so cutting an event is not a dollar for dollar savings. And the consequence of cutting an event is you lose the entire event to save a fraction of the expense. Through strategic programming, it's a more comprehensive look towards full cost recovery, however that might look. That might be strategizing and consolidating events so that you can put your sponsors onto specific ones or generate revenue more through more ticket sales, things like that, in an effort to do a 100% cost recovery, no impact on the general fund. So that's what strategic programming means when you read these. And the other question, the last question I'll address is there's a question as why staff salaries weren't put on this. And one of the main reasons staff salaries were not put on this is because staff salaries are very complicated. They're a function of negotiations, of the competitive climate for talent, and also not all the salaries are hitting the general fund. So a reduction of salaries in one of the three ways that the city council could do it is either paying people less, or having fewer people to pay, or having them work fewer hours, will lead to a decline in service levels. As that relates to the public, the reason we didn't put those on, and it's something that per your direction, we could study and add in. But the risk reward to lowering or putting salary cuts together is, it's, in our opinion, not a long-term solution when we're looking at this big hole. And if you cut salaries now or reduce hours and have a lower service level, then long-term, we're competing with other jurisdictions. And I think the question to answer there is, are city salaries too high? And that's something that warrants its own philosophical debate that can last a long time. But the city council did direct staff to do a cost and comp study, which would determine where city salaries are relative to the jurisdictions that we compete for talent. We're doing that study now, but preliminary results indicate that we're generally in line with competing jurisdictions. And the timeline for that is, I don't know the exact timeline, but the results will be coming soon, and that will indicate where we are on a global scale in terms of salaries. My point with that is just to explain the rationale as to why they're not in there, and to explain that upon council's direction, that's something that we can study and potentially add in, along with any other solutions that the city council or the residents would like the city to study and put in as options. So that's a quick overview of the tool. When the public completes it, they'll move on and they'll have an opportunity to submit their results with a message that if they want us to study more, they could put that in. So that's the tool, and we'll have Corey come down and kind of do an explanation of some of his research and do kind of share with some of the preliminary results that we've received already in kind of where people are leaning in towards in terms of their preferences. So with that, before Corey comes down, I'll offer any opportunity for questions.
Members of the council have some questions for staff? Corey.
I'll take the clicker. Okay, good evening, Honorable Mayor, City Council, and community. My name is Corey Gorham, Management Analyst. I don't have any neat or fun metaphors to explain what I'm doing tonight, so I'll just jump in. So tonight I'm reviewing how cities are funded, the various revenue opportunities available to the city. I'll provide detail on revenue options that have a significant impact on resolving the deficit, and lastly, I'll cover the results of the financial fixer tool. Cities are funded through a variety of revenue streams, which are largely made up of taxes and user fees. The City of Yucaipa's tax revenue streams include property tax, sales tax, and a 7% transient occupancy tax. As listed on the screen, there are several other tax-related options that exist. For example, a utility user's tax imposes a tax on the consumption of utility services, such as electric, gas, water, sewer, etc. A business license tax can be imposed on the businesses that operate within the city. User fees and charges for services are significant. However, these fees are designed to cover the cost of providing that particular service. For example, building permits, plan checks, inspections, etc. And the use of these funds are limited to covering the cost of providing that service. The city does pursue grants. However, funds are often one-time infusions and can only be used for the specific project or purpose in which they are awarded. So here's another chart that shows the city's projected revenue for fiscal year 25. The four major streams for the city are property tax, sales tax, charges for service, intergovernmental, and those make up about 84% of the revenues. During the process of identifying revenue options, staff considered all of the options that were previously listed. Possibilities explored included local tax measures and financing districts, updating franchise fees and user fees, and implementing new programs such as commercial cannabis. From there, the list was narrowed down to those that would have a significant and near-term financial impact on the deficit. Facing a $10 million gap, the goal of any new revenue stream is to secure a stable and reliable source of funding to ensure the long-term financial sustainability of the city. As a result, waste hauler franchise fees, a local sales tax, and cannabis business license program are going to be highlighted for consideration. A franchise fee is compensation paid by an entity for use of the public rights of way. The fee for waste hauler services has not increased since 1996, and a 10% increase would generate an additional $2.2 million in revenue. There is a great video that can be found on our social media and YouTube page in which the city manager dives into this topic and provides additional detail. There is a public hearing in which council will consider this increase scheduled for next Monday. A transaction and use tax, TUT, is an additional sales tax levy on top of the 1% Bradley Burns local sales and use tax. A TUT applies to all purchases of goods and merchandise. A city does not have the ability to make exemptions as to which goods and merchandise it applies to. However, items that are exempt include groceries, prescription medicine, real estate, and personal services such as medical, dental, etc. A TUT can be implemented in increments up to the state cap of 9.25%, and this is important to note as both cities and counties are restricted by this cap. So, in other words, if a city has a local sales tax of 9.25%, any proposed sales tax increase by the county would not apply as the state cap has been met. This is a critical factor to consider as it keeps revenues generated locally to the city as opposed to going towards the county pool. To illustrate the sales tax breakout, here's a graph that shows the allocation breakdown of that each agent receives from the current sales tax rate in Yucaipa, which is 7.75%. Should council and ultimately the community decide to authorize and approve a sales tax measure, a 1% TUT increases the total sales tax rate to 8.75% and generates approximately $6 million in revenue. A 1.5% increase brings the total sales tax rate to the state cap of 9.25% and generates roughly $9 million in revenue. In looking at neighboring cities in the county, 9 of 24 cities have a sales tax rate of 8.75% or greater. These include Barstow, Chino, Colton, Montclair, which is actually 9%, Ontario, Redlands, San Bernardino, Victorville, and Yucca Valley. The last option being highlighted tonight is a potential cannabis business license program. State law gives cities the authority to adopt ordinances that establish standards, requirements, and regulations for the licensing and permitting of commercial cannabis activities. Activities that could be allowed include retail, which is storefront and delivery, distribution, manufacturing, cultivation, and testing. Each city determines the regulatory framework, which includes the permissible activity type, number, location, any restrictions, and application process. Based on an industry-identified ratio of 1 storefront for every 20,000 residents, Yucaipa could potentially support 2 to 3 locations. It is estimated that the city could generate $1.5 million in revenues, and should the council wish to pursue this option, it is recommended an additional analysis and discussion on the framework is required. Okay, some conclusion. I have some graphs here that show the results from the financial fixer tool that was mentioned earlier. So this first page you're looking at are the revenue-related results. As you can see, based on what was submitted, 67% of submissions were in favor of cannabis. On the cost reduction side, related to public safety, the biggest vote getter at 58% was delaying the purchase of the ladder truck. And lastly, on the community service side, there was really 2, maybe 3 big winners. That was modifying the sport field rental policies, strategic event programming, special event programming, and at 36% was closing the Five Winds Park. That concludes my portion of the presentation.
Okay, thank you. So next on the agenda is questions and discussions from the council, and then after that, we'll move into the town hall portion and have some public discussion about everything. One point of clarification, I think the state cap might actually be 10.25% though. But we'll have to verify that. So we don't have any easy choices in front of us as a community. I think naturally, when as citizens we hear that a government agency, whether it's the state or the county or our local city, is in a budget deficit, our knee-jerk reaction is to say, okay, government, tighten your belt. And that certainly is the sentiment of a lot of the residents here in Yucaipa. I understand it completely. And that is absolutely an option. I think that our job as the local government here in Yucaipa is to be transparent about the numbers, about what the problem is, and what the options are. And so the decision in front of us really is, what do we want Yucaipa to look like in terms of service levels, right? That's the decision we have to make as a community. Can salaries, number of personnel be cut? Yes, absolutely they can. People have to understand what that means in terms of the provision of services, right? We can't cut the number of personnel and provide the same level of services across the board that we are today. I think another important thing to understand is that the bulk of what we spend money on here in Yucaipa is public safety, right? 64% of our general fund is spent on public safety. There is not enough meat on the bone in places other than public safety to solve this problem entirely without cutting into public safety if we're not also producing additional revenue, right? So that's something to understand as well, that if we get to a point where the council and the community say to the city, we're not providing any more revenue, we want you to solve this problem with cuts alone. Okay, we can do that, but we need the public to understand what that means in terms of what service levels will look like in public safety, community services across the board, right? This is a public safety supportive community. No one wants to hear cut public safety. No one wants to hear raise taxes. We've got some tough choices to make. At this point, I'd like to see if the council has any input. You know, one of the comments I saw online was, why is the city coming to the public for input? Isn't it your job to come up with a solution? And yes, I mean, staff has spent a considerable amount of time, the finance department, our analyst, our whole staff has come together over the past months and grappled with this issue. We've come up with lots of options in terms of revenue and cost cutting. We do have a preferred option, but this has to be a community decision. As a community, we have to decide what we want our community to look like, what we're willing to pay for, and what we're not.
Yeah, it's called transparency, letting everybody know what's happening and getting everybody involved. I have some questions, but I'll defer to my colleagues first. Questions of staff, comments? We'll start from right to left.
I don't have any questions, no.
Councilman Thorpe,
I don't have any right now, but I might have some later.
Councilman Garner.
Yeah. How did you get that number on the cannabis? What'd you say, 1.5 million? Is that per month, per year?
That would be per year.
Per year. How'd you get that number?
So what I did is I looked at neighboring cities that have cannabis programs. The numbers can vary greatly depending on the type of activity permitted. So it was a rough estimation. We looked at, each city reports their revenues generally. So I looked at the number of storefronts in that particular city, their population, the revenues that were reported, and that's how we came up with that number.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Venable.
I'd like to hear what the public has to say. And
Perfect. All right, I got a question. In 2020, I think it's 2020 maybe, 2019, LA County explored a tax measure countywide that increased the cap for municipalities as well, because it was the county tax at the 9.25% or whatever that state maximum was. While there were certainly cities, more conservative cities in LA County that opposed the tax measure, it ultimately passed. How much of that tax revenue then stays with the city? Let's say if it was the city of Burbank, and then the county of Los Angeles put a tax measure on the ballot countywide. Do each individual city see an increase, or is it still the 1% based on this chart you had?
Well, let's bring that example a little closer to home. So here in San Bernardino County, we have Measure I, which is the tax administered by SBCTA for freeway and road funding, right? The SBCTA board, which is countywide, will determine how those funds are spent. So currently, there's a half-cent countywide sales tax for Measure I, which helps fund road projects. That countywide board determines how those funds are spent. SBCTA is planning in 2026 to go countywide for a measure to increase that, right? If that measure passes, every Yucaipa resident theoretically could vote no on that tax, right? If it passes countywide, we get charged the tax anyway, and we don't control, we have one vote on that board as the city of Yucaipa. So, we don't necessarily control how those funds are spent. So one of the advantages to, I guess, staking your piece of that cap is, as time goes on, the counties and other agencies come and take up chunks of that cap. We get to a point where we've reached the cap and we lose the opportunity to collect that and keep it locally, right? So when a city, it's first come, first serve. So if a city establishes a city sales tax and eventually the cap is reached, then we're locked in at that. If anyone comes behind it, whether it's, the county or no, there's no, they can't apply it here in Yucaipa.
And that money would stay local.
Correct.
But it's a sales tax, so even visitors who come here for any festivals or anything else, assuming we don't cut these festivals, they would help pay that tax based on, because if they eat at $100 at the Hickory Ranch, they would have an extra $1.50 of the bill that goes to the city of Yucaipa.
Yeah, and I think the other really important thing to understand about sales tax is that the world has changed, right? There has been a shift in spending habits, and more and more people are purchasing online. And so one of the drives to establish sales tax among cities now is that without a city sales tax, we collect a portion of the sales tax generated from brick and mortar sales within the city limits, right? That's it. We don't collect any portion of sales that occur online, automotive sales, RV sales that happen outside of the city. So as a resident of Yucaipa, if you go on Amazon and buy something, the city doesn't collect anything on that. If you go to the city of Redlands and buy a car at an auto mall there, the city of Yucaipa gets none of that. Whereas if the city had a city sales tax, that entire sales tax would apply to where the product is delivered. So you order something, it's delivered to your house, that city sales tax portion flows directly to the city, and that's where cities are seeing the big advantage, because that's where the trends are. Our sales tax consultant, HDL, gives us quarterly reports. The last quarterly report, one of the documents they showed us were trends over the last 10 years. Over a 10-year period, sales tax generated by brick and mortar stores has increased about 23%. In that same 10-year time period, online sales have increased 550%. And cities that don't have city sales taxes are not realizing any of those revenues.
Is there any preliminary polling relative to the county's 2026 effort to seek a sales tax measure that would ultimately affect our residents as well?
I'm not privy to that information yet. It may be premature for that. I will tell you that as part of our due diligence on evaluating all of our options, the city has reached out to a polling firm and conducted a poll. I'm sure many people in the community have received those phone calls or emails on that poll. We have not yet received the report document, but we have had a conference call with the polling firm to go over those results here in Yucaipa.
Corey, can you scroll down on the cost-cutting public safety service options, please? Right there. And can you go to the slide? So I see reduce 5 deputies to the city of Yucaipa. Can you go to the slide that showed the trends that this app captured relative to most supportive for cuts and revenues, please? No, that's not it. The one above that. There you go. What's oh, I see. Community resource. Okay. Any other questions of staff before we open up to the public? No? Okay, so for those of you who saw the agenda, there is no public comment section. This is not going to be with that 3-minute buzzer going off. This is a town hall discussion for us to speak candidly to one another. However, this is still a public meeting of the city of Yucaipa. Be respectful, obey the rules of decorum. Please be mindful of the time that you are taking. Maybe taking time from your neighbor. Make your point. This is we are all very passionate about our hometown and our community. We want to see what's best for it. But let's be mindful of the time that we're speaking. So I want to hear what everybody has to say. I know our Mayor Pro Tem has relayed that sentiment as well. I think we all are eager to hear creative ideas. So just raise your hand where you're at, and we will get a mic to you.
Yep. Okay, so we have, over here, we have Ryan, and we're going to...
And Jenna's over there.
Jenna? Okay, so we have 2 microphones. Very good.
Who was first here?
And if you could just say your name. Just say your name and let us know where you live in the city. You can say seated, whatever you'd like.
Dr. Lynette Thomas. I am representing Friends of the Library, Yucaipa Valley Friends of the Library. We've all worked, including all of you in front of us, for our Building Forward matching grant. We thank you for that. We support it. I don't see us there anywhere, so I'm hoping we're not even part of the discussion, but we'd love to know it, that we are secure in those funds and breaking ground soon on what I consider to be a public safety and community service item. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
So I think there's a difference between a one-time expenditure with maintenance versus ongoing annual contracts and maintenance, or ongoing contracts and costs. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, the problem we're really trying to solve for here is the structural deficit, which again means ongoing expenses are greater than ongoing revenue, right? Okay. So when we look at capital projects, those tend to be more one-time expenditures, except that once we build something, we have to maintain it, right? So when we look at the library, the decision that has to be made is, do we commit the one-time expenditures? Knowing currently we have a library that we maintain, at least in theory, a new library would cost a lot less to maintain in the initial years because it's a brand-new building. Certain things are under warranty. We don't staff that building. That is a county-staffed operation. So that question will come down to, when the time comes to make that final decision, do we do the one-time expenditure? Staff have worked, and the council has worked very hard to find partnerships to bring in the vast majority of the funds needed to fund that project with, much more than the city would expend. So we'll have to look at that. We don't know the exact cost. We have estimates, but until we go out to RFP and those proposals come in, we won't know the exact costs yet. So we're in the process of putting together the RFP documentation. And when we get those numbers back, we can take a closer look and bring it to the council.
But that's not really part of our discussion tonight. I mean, that's something, the library is something we all want very badly. So that's not really part of this discussion, is it?
No, I just wanted to make sure we're talking, there's a difference between what in theory is a one-time expenditure versus adding a deputy sheriff costs every year, $250,000 for a fully burdened deputy and reoccurring costs that we have to cover. So thank you for your question. Next question.
Hi, my name's Jamie. It's my first meeting, so it's really awesome. I actually wrote a handful of grants, so I was following almost everything, just almost. This much I don't understand. But I just wondered, is there like any kind of programs, a volunteer program, where we can go out and put what the community can do, give back to you guys or our city in some way? Is there any kind of structured volunteer program? I guess that's my question. In the city. Besides the sheriff's department, of course.
Thank you for your comments, ma'am. Do you want to answer this? Do you want Megan maybe? Or?
Sure, I can take part of it, and then, we have quite a bit of staff here. Feel free to jump in. There are a lot of ways to volunteer in the community and give back. If you're speaking financially, one of the things that we have resurrected and repurposed is the Yucaipa Foundation. And so Yucaipa Foundation, we've repurposed to be a mechanism to support this facility, the Performing Arts Center, and help us get some cost recovery on the programming of this facility. Volunteering in the community, there are lots and lots of ways to do that through committees and commissions. And I don't know, Megan, do you want to jump in here? No, I got it. You got it? Okay.
Thank you for your comment, ma'am. Next question.
Hi, my name is Beth Scott. I'm with Yucaipa Valley American Little League, and I'm here representing regarding the youth sports contract modification. I'm a resident of the city. My son has played, and my daughter, at the Little League for over 10 years. I've served on the board in many capacities over the last 10 years. I've met with Megan, Nick, Phil, Chris Venable. He was instrumental last season helping us getting our lights fixed at the baseball field, so we appreciate you, Chris. I know that the amount of money that will be saved or that we would have to spend is just minimal to you guys, but for us, it's a lot. We currently, the city indicated there was a little message on Facebook about Little League being a failing system. So I'd just like to speak a little bit about that for a minute. So currently in this city, we have over 800 kids that participate in Little League between us and nationals. So I reached out to my buddies and asked how many people they thought played in the travel ball organizations here. So past presidents, my friends that I know that run travel ball teams, we have about 150 kids locally that play in travel ball. So meeting with Megan and the rest of the crew, that indicated that they would like to bring in an outside travel ball organization to take over some of our field usage. We have over 800 kids, guys. We already have, our field space is very, very limited. With the new city contract, we don't have numbers as of yet, but we already charged the local residents $200 for their kids to play just in one season. And for the other seasons, we try to keep it, for our fall season, we try to keep it about $50. Our umpires are expensive. The price is going up every year. This year, our hope was to put in some fencing. We wanted to start saving money to put lights on the field. But those plans have all halted. In the last 3 years, we have spent over $73,000 on field maintenance. With our new contract, the city will be responsible for those field maintenance. So that's putting in the home plate, pitchers' mounds, doing all the clay, putting fence toppers up, everything that we're doing over there. And that's not including the lights. We pay a light bill also. So currently with our field usage agreement, we pay $10 per player, and that's every single youth sport here in town. But we're giving so much more to that. I mean, $73,000 in the last 3 years that we at Yucaipa Valley American Little League have put. Football has gotten lights. They've put additional work. They're filling gopher holes out in the outfield at 7th Street because the city's not able to do it. We've personally worked on a rodent problem in our snack bar. Nationals has done tons and tons of clay at their field. We have the I Street Park that is just, everybody is just so worried about these fields being taken from us with other organizations outside the city coming in. We already share the fields with Travel Ball. The Squires, Rough Riders, West Coast Yankees, we're already sharing those fields, so we're not really sure why an outside organization needs to come in. Little League is trying to promote some type of travel ball program. So I came to Megan and to Nick and to Phil and asked, well, if we do this Little League travel ball, can we pay you guys? Can we give you some additional money for us to come in and host these tournaments? Because we are able to host with travel ball. We can keep everything here in our city. We'll have the snack bar running. Unfortunately, they hadn't given me approval, but USSSA is already starting to look at our fields, and that's the outside organization. So I just wanted to come here today and tell you guys a little bit of background about our youth sports. I'm Yucaipa Valley American Little League. We've been here since 1958. Little League has been here since 1958. Why do you guys think that these high school players are doing so well? They come from Little League. They're not coming from travel ball. They all start in Little League. So I just wanted to, I don't know if you guys have any questions, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me respond just very briefly. This is a big discussion in and of itself, so it's probably, isn't the venue to get into that whole discussion. But let me just say, Yucaipa is a baseball town. This city is 100% committed to making sure that our youth have the opportunity to play baseball here. I want you to know that from a staff perspective, and I'm sure this applies for the council, there is no desire to take away from Little League at all. It's also not a money play. I think the bigger concern is, we have some field usage challenges, and we want to make sure that the fields are being utilized optimally and that everyone has a chance, as they're owned by the public, that everyone has a chance to utilize those fields. And those are the kind of issues we're working through. And then what's the best way to ensure that, that the fields are maintained? What's the fair way for everybody? So there are issues that we're trying to work through, but I want you to know from staff perspective, and I'm sure from the council, this city is committed to baseball. We're committed to Little League. No one's trying to take the fields away. We want to make sure that Little League has priority, and that whatever is set up is fair and not a financial burden, right? So there's a lot of details to still be worked through, and there'll be ongoing discussions, but we'll work through it.
Next question.
My name's Melanie Martindale. I was trying to come at this by a solution kind of point of view. So I came up with 9 different things, and I just researched a 10th one when I was on my phone. Number 1, sell off excess public land that the city owns. This will help the city recoup some of the funds they're missing. Number 2, allow for a cannabis business program. Number 3, allow for a large box store such as Target, Walmart, or Home Depot to build within our city limits that would provide jobs, revenue, sales tax, and allow the city to stick to the motto of Shop Yucaipa First. Give 1 or 1.5 sales tax, but have it earmarked specifically to pay for public safety, which will include our fire, police, and paramedics. By doing this, we're securing public safety and the public, letting them know that this is something that Measure E was not, which it went into the general fund. So there was that problem. I understand 5 wins may be popular, but we're kind of cutting our nose off to spite our face. I think we need to close 5 wins and put all concerts here at YPAC, which is what the YPAC was built for. And I don't know how the Koyman loan works, but maybe we need to back out of that. We don't have the funds for it. Sell the Shire Community Center and move any and all events there to the YPAC, as it's the nearest center to that area. Lean on volunteers and donations for publicly held events such as the Winterfest, egg hunt, and other such things, so that we can either scale it back on funds or, maybe cut some money there if it helps us. And then hiring freeze. Any vacant positions need to be frozen for the next 2 years, and we don't hire for them. And then in 2 years, we come back and look at it and see if it's necessary. And then stop reporting grants and other funds as part of the general fund report. While this may be past practice, it also dupes the public because it shows there's more funds in that general fund than there is. So we kind of need clear numbers, especially the younger folks. And then my last one was for the crossing guards. I was Googling grants, so maybe we can look at grants and see if there's any grants available to cover the crossing guard cost.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Next question, sir.
Hi, I'm Brett Granlund, and number one, I'm a former council member, and I represented this city in the state assembly from '94 to 2000. I keep quiet because I think it's really inappropriate for political has-beens to come out and try to run what the new guys have got in charge of. So this is the first time I've addressed this council in over 20 years, because I don't think it's one bit appropriate to come out and try to, once you're out, come out and try to take over the guys that are in there. They got a tough job to do. You've all got a very tough job, okay? But I see some things that I think a little history and institutional knowledge could be of some value here. And I want to just take a little trip down memory lane. November of 2000, we had an election. We had a measure on the ballot, Measure O. And if you know the history of Measure O, we had a general plan approved, and a very good general plan approved. And we had zoning and approvals for the big box stores that I just heard somebody talk about, Target, Walmart, Home Depot, those kinds of revenue generating facilities or developments were approved in that general plan. It was a 3-2 vote. There were 2 council members that didn't like it. They wanted a weed patch. And so they circulated a petition and actually got Measure O on the ballot. And some very uninformed voters that were misled about an asphalt batch plant, a chrome plating plant, and a paint plant, and all the things that would just destroy Yucaipa were planned to go in there. And it was all the development. Those letters of intent were signed in place. One of the things that happened to make that whole development happen in our freeway corridor that was very important to the city, very important. I got the funding for the new off-ramp there at Oak Glen Road on the freeway to service the Robinson property or the Carnival property, the Christmas pumpkin patch Christmas tree that turned into a carnival. Cash generating business. Probably does a lot of business, but probably doesn't generate much sales tax. I ran a heavy cash generating business for a long time. And sometimes the bookkeeping is so tough, those records and that sales tax just doesn't quite make it onto the books because you can't get good help. Mistakes happen. But nobody gets any money out of it, number one. Number two, had we had that development that all ultimately canceled their letters of intent, moved on to the donut hole in Redlands, and all of that commercial development, all of the restaurants and the sales tax generating development that was coming here took off to Redlands and took off to Beaumont because we passed Measure O, and that was done by the voters. They were misled, and it should have never made it to the ballot, but it did, and it was passed. It was a horrible, horrible ballot measure. It's taken 24 years for the chickens to come home to roost. They passed that in 2000 and shut down all that commercial development that we absolutely needed along that freeway corridor. That development would have generated huge impact fees, huge infrastructure improvement fees, and an ongoing revenue. We can talk all we want about grants. Grants are one-time revenue. They're not ongoing. You use a grant to build something, develop something with your grant, now you got to support it, as has already been pointed out. And if you don't have ongoing revenue to support it, you wind up just like lottery winners that go out and buy big fancy houses and lots of things they can't afford. And when the tax bills come due and the costs come due to maintain it, they file bankruptcy. That's what the winner in the lottery does for a lot of people, because they develop a lifestyle and a cash flow need that they can't support on their one-time lottery winnings. I think we're suffering from some of that. We talk about public safety, and a sales tax increase will roll back. In my day, we had a half-cent sales tax increase for public safety. It was temporary. And of course, when it got time to expire, oh my God, we're not going to have any public safety. We got to make it permanent. So that's one of the tax increases that we now have we already have that's permanent. Went on the books as a temporary tax increase, and then got shifted to a permanent tax increase. If we don't look at how do we generate sales tax the way that it's generated by having the development of businesses, by keeping our shopping in Yucaipa, keeping our tax dollars in Yucaipa. You know, if we want to go to Home Depot, and a lot of people go to Home Depot, I do, you go to Redlands. Redlands gets the tax revenue. Or you go to Beaumont, and they got a higher sales tax, so you pay higher sales tax in Riverside County than you do here. So we pay more money in sales tax to drive to Beaumont to spend money that we should be spending right here in Yucaipa. Well, I'm not sure how we undo that damage that was done in 2000, but I got an idea how you do it. Instead of looking at this whole list of increase, we're going to talk about increased management fees. We get a 19% increase before you. I don't know if you passed it or not, but the proposal is a 19% increase on waste disposal now. I mean, Burtec has got to cover the cost of fuel and labor and tipping fees and all of that kind of stuff, and they got to raise their rates. But if we pile on a higher franchise fee and contribute to yet another trash disposal tax, that hurts the people in this town. There's a lot of people just don't have the money to support this economy.
Thank you, Brett. Let me, first of all, thank you. Let me jump in and address a couple of things you said. I want to make sure everyone has a chance to speak tonight. The man who handed you the microphone there, Ryan Miller, is working awfully hard to try to bring economic growth here to the city. You've touched on something that's really important, because we bring in currently about $5.5 million of sales tax revenue. For a city of about 55,000 people, that's pretty sad. It's entirely insufficient. Most cities rely on sales tax as their primary source of revenue. And I think there was a strategy here in Yucaipa, and I think the strategy was, you know, if you build it, they will come, right? So we invest in infrastructure. That infrastructure allows us to build more, primarily housing. For example, the basins that were built took land that was previously in floodplain area and couldn't be built on, and made it so you could build in those areas, and the big push was residential. Let's build rooftops. The idea being, I think, that once you reached enough rooftops, that would attract the commercial development, right? The commercial development would produce revenue. It's great in concept. I think the problem we're facing now is that the commercial development and thus the revenue side of that hasn't caught up yet, right? So we've increased to a population of about 55,000 people who now need services. We have 209 miles of public roads that were built. People need police and fire services, all types of services, development services. If you want to, do an addition to your house, put a patio cover, you come into City Hall, you need planning staff, building and safety staff. So we have this great need for services now, but we don't have the big revenue generators. And it makes sense if you think about it. We don't have the big box stores, the regional shopping centers, the auto malls, the things that produce the big revenue for a lot of cities. I think there's an attempt to fix that with the Freeway Corridor Specific Plan update that's coming to try to stimulate some growth in the freeway corridor. And I think in time, those opportunities will come back again. We need to capitalize on them when they do. One of the big decisions we have to make as a community here is, what do we value? And a lot of people here in Yucaipa say, we want to stay rural, right? And that's important to a lot of people. I understand that. And the general plan lays out a vision, and In overly simplistic terms, it is, look, we developed the freeway corridor with a lot of commercial activities. As you move up the boulevard, it becomes a little bit more rural. As you get up into the North Bench, it's very rural. And in general, that's the concept. I think the challenge has been here that we can't have it all ways as a community, right? We can't shun development and things that will bring revenue, and at the same time say we don't want to tax ourselves, and at the same time say, but we want all the services of an urban environment, right? At some point, something has to give, right? And so I think long-term, a great solution is economic development, but that takes time. We just don't have 10 years to solve the deficit. And that's the short-term challenge we're facing right now.
So before we go back to questions, Brett, 1 second.
Yeah, okay.
I want to follow up. I kind of want to piggyback on what you said, but I do have a question. If we had this same fix tool in front of us at build-out, has any of our studies relative to the freeway corridor specific plan given us an idea of what kind of a revenue we can anticipate coming out of the freeway corridor specific plan? And is there an opportunity for us to bridge the gap in the interim with some of these revenue generating options with a sunset of once the vision that our city elders have put into place from the last 30 years come to fruition? We built the houses. Now we have the population to attract the revenue. I agree with what you said near the freeway, because I don't think there's anything rural about the Interstate 10 freeway. Can we then entertain the idea of whatever revenue generating options we bring in to sunset, because now we have a way for the city to generate the revenue that sustains itself minus some of these taxes?
Sure. Sunsets are an option when you establish tax revenue. I think the trouble with it is it's very hard to predict in 5 years, 10 years down the road, where the city will be exactly. City always has an option to vote to roll back taxes, but if you become reliant on that revenue to, for example, pay for your police and fire contracts, and you get to a point where now it's sunsetting, you see communities really get in a panic at that point. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do if this sunsets, right? We're really in trouble. We're going to have to get back. In terms of estimating revenue, it's very hard. It depends a lot on the types of businesses that come. I can tell you, there was a few years ago, there was a potential Costco project in town that deal fell apart. A successful Costco could produce $3-4 million a year in revenue for the city alone, right? We have industrial projects that could bring, close to $1 million a year in revenue. So commercial development is real revenue for the city. You don't get there in huge numbers with the mom and pop shops, the restaurants, most of our sales taxes, gas stations, restaurants, those sorts of things, which if you look at all of the business in Yucaipa, all of that business activity, it adds up to $5.5 million, right? You could get that with one or two of the larger commercial projects.
Right, we cut you off, so real quick, wrap up and we'll move on.
I'm going to wrap up real quick. That's, as I opened, said has-beens got no business sticking their nose in because we take way too much time and energy. But I do have a solution for you, and that's the point I wanted to make. And this is my opinion of a solution. The best thing that the 5 of you can do, the quickest action you can take, you can prepare and place on the ballot, on the November ballot, a repeal of Measure O. Open up the restrictions and the commercial development along that freeway corridor, put it to good use, take the revenue from the jobs, take the revenue that the school districts can use to help with the Little League and other things that are mentioned, that the water district could use. Shouldn't mention the water district. But that the city can use, because we've lived off impact fees. But the impact fees for the housing, it's one time and it's not ongoing. The impact fees that come from commercial, it's a one-time revenue on the impact fee, but it's in an ongoing benefit of sales tax revenue, convenience to the people who live here, providing the services, and jobs that it creates. You don't have to travel to go get a job. There's jobs here. put a measure on the ballot to open that freeway corridor and reverse that horrible decision that they made in Measure O, which was just sour grapes from two council members that preferred weed patches over development. You can do that, and you can generate revenue. You don't have to raise anything. You have to just collect your potential that's out there. It's out there. Business is out there. It's going to be hard to lure back the people that we chased off because they went to Beaumont and Redlands. But the point is, that is developable, nice, developable property, properly managed for tax generating, service generating, job generating development will serve this community in perpetuity. It's the best thing you could do now is act, put that measure on the ballot and give the voters a chance to fix it. Fix the damage that was done a quarter century ago. Fix it and start moving ahead to put in the things that a city of our size needs for its own survival, convenience, and services.
Thank you, sir. Next question.
Hello, good evening. My name is Dean Barton, and I have a revenue-generating idea. So I've been in the film and TV industry just a tiny bit. And have you ever looked at the possibility of reaching out to film or TV production? Because they do local shoots. I've been on local shoots myself, which means they're looking for, just something that looks different, or something that can be filming for, I don't know how many days, a week, 2 weeks, something like that. We have a lot of, this is a big city, and there's a lot of, maybe there's a lot of areas that those industries would be interested. There's a lot of TV production and film production that's, definitely after COVID, it just exacerbated, it just went up a lot. So that was one little idea that I had, and maybe, somebody could reach out from the city. Thank you.
What would you say your name was, sir?
Dean Barton.
I thought you said Tim Burton at first. Nice.
Thank you.
All right. I just want to, it's like, man. All right, sorry, next question. Who we got?
Just a couple of things. One is I'm Don Harlan. On your tool here, it'd be, I think, useful to know, for instance, if you cut one sheriff, what the percentage of that is, of the department, and how many are left behind, so some kind of percentages of what that impact that would have, looking at this tool. The other thing is I've heard very little about the postmortem of how this happened, and where along this journey that started supposedly a long time ago, what decisions that were made that have impacted the budget more so than other decisions. And it's very difficult to look at your graphs and see the percentage differences and increases that happened. So it'd be really much more helpful to have more data that specifies, we made this decision and this is what cost us, and when that decision was made. And we made this decision on personnel and this is what cost us. Because it's hard to tell from your graphs, and you kind of make it sound like, well, this has been going on for 10 years. Really, it hasn't. It's something that's been, there's some decisions that have been made, sometimes small decisions, but sometimes some pretty big decisions that have impacted this budget. So it'd be nice to do a little more postmortem. I know that's difficult because you have to look back and look at decisions that were made, and some of them have more recently been made that have been costly. So let's hear about those so that we can talk about how we would reverse them.
All right, so we'll take it one at a time.
Yeah.
Captain, do you want to do
I can take that real quick if, yeah.
For the sheriff one?
Yeah, I can take that. We have about 26 deputies in our current contract with the sheriff's department. I'll let you do the math on what percentage that would be. But, there wasn't any one thing that led us here. It was a series of things that happened over time. I don't know if you heard at the beginning of the presentation when our finance director had the earlier slides, but, really beginning in 2008, 2009 time period, the city started spending significantly on infrastructure projects, right? So the concept, I think, being that let's build this infrastructure and then that'll trigger development and revenue will come. But we built a lot of things that are tremendous assets to this community now. This building being a more recent example. The police station, the community park, Fire Station 3, the list goes on and on. We have a lot of parks in this community. The basins, multi-million-dollar project. And so as reserves were spent, and we're building infrastructure that now we need to maintain, to the extent that we're building facilities, now those facilities need to be maintained and staffed to provide programming. So costs increase there. Some things really somewhat out of our control are really steep increases over the last few years in the costs of our public safety contracts, and that's not unique to Yucaipa. That's everywhere in California. Every city is experiencing that. From last fiscal year to the current fiscal year, the cost of our contracts for police and fire combined increased $3 million, and that was without increasing service levels at all. That's for the same number of personnel. And those kind of increases we're seeing more frequently. It really wasn't any one thing, but over time, the city invested in facilities and infrastructure and took on expenses and grew in population. The more people that are here, those people need services. As we built new neighborhoods, we built roads to go with those neighborhoods. Those roads need maintaining now. For a city of 55,000 people, 209 miles is a lot of miles of roads. That's more than what you typically see. So that's a long answer to the question, but
So,
here we are.
also, I was a deputy sheriff for the sheriff's department for about a decade. I was associated with that agency. The county really didn't give cost of living increases, and if they did, it was to offset the cost only of increased retirement costs, so that the deputies were just not losing money, but certainly not gaining any money. And as a result, I, along with hundreds of deputies, sought employment elsewhere. And that was it. It was sheer compensation. These deputies were working the same streets as San Marino police officers and Chino police officers and these small municipalities that paid substantially more to do the same job. I was getting shot at the same as a San Marino police officer was getting shot at. My back window was shot out driving down Waterman, but I was getting compensated substantially less. And there's only so much I take before we leave. The sheriff's department the county was recognizing that they were undercompensating their gun carriers, and so they gave them the appropriate raises. But the county doesn't eat that cost. We are a contractor for the county, so that cost goes up. Cal Fire does amazing work. We've seen how fast they're able to knock down fires and the manpower they bring to large fires that they can't knock down quickly. We as a city don't negotiate those contracts at all. We get handed a bill, we got to pay it, or we don't. We just reduce the service. So that, and like the city manager said, I remember, I could tell you right, if we go back to that slide, in 2007, I think is when we finished, I want to say is when we finished construction on the city hall and started construction on the community center. Those were the first two real big, think back, the city hall was portables. There were trailers in what is currently the transit center. So the city started becoming more of a city following its incorporation about 10 years prior. Or I'm sorry, 15 years prior. Every one of those big buildings like this one and the sheriff's department and the city hall cost money. But we haven't really increased the revenue. We as a city continue spending because we've gotten accustomed to the way of life that we have here in Yucaipa. We like what we have. We like seeing our crime go down. I get excited when I hear our captains get in front of us and report that there was a reduction in fatal traffic accidents and a reduction in Part 1 and Part 2 crimes. And I like hearing that our point in time count of homeless people is being reduced. But that's, I said it before, and I think I was quoted even as saying it, is that the blanket of safety that we sleep so securely under is not cheap. It costs money. So, next
Mayor,
question.
If I could add one more thing. Anna, if you could go to the next slide. There's several little decisions that kind of got us to where we are. But one decision that was particularly difficult, or maybe we should have gone a different route, is back in 2020, and we kind of looked at this graph a little bit. One thing that I failed to mention earlier is what also happened in 2020 is the city had sponsored a sales tax measure and identified the trend of increasing public safety costs as the mechanism for or to support that measure. And it was a general sales tax measure, not a special tax, but general. And the city governance at that point in time saw the train coming down the track. They saw what our trends were. They saw the rising costs, and they said, they believed it so much that they said, hey, let's put a measure on the ballot that went and failed, and that was Measure E in 2020. And so also in that graph, as things are going down, that downward slope, right before we got the COVID money, the city council at that time saw that trend, and they said, hey, we got a problem. We're going to go out, and the way it was communicated was, hey, we got paramedic issues in our program, but when that measure failed, the service levels didn't change. They continued the city continued to spend, and that trajectory, that diversion of costs rising quicker than revenues continued. And so now, that was 4 years ago, and that trajectory, the problem didn't solve itself. It's that same problem that was one of the red flags early, is we had that measure, but service levels never changed. And so if we look back at, from a post-mortem, maybe either the bigger picture of what that trend should have been explained clearer at that point in time, or service levels should have been impacted following that failed measure. But basically, at that point in time, we had a deficit isolated there. That deficit now has grown so much, it's kind of grabbed the whole city. And so it's not new. It's not one decision that got us here. It's the strategy of, early on in 2007, 2008, we were building, that stuff costs. But you can see we still had a big gap in those early years, but that trend got closer and closer. Red flags were raised, the measure failed. No changes were made on the cost side. And so we're kind of accelerating towards the cliff,
So, and real quick, sorry. I disagree slightly with our finance director that it was not portrayed to us, and I voted no on that tax measure because it wasn't portrayed to us as a $7 million structural deficit. We were told it was a sub-million, like a $750,000 deficit to our paramedic, and that everything else was fine. In fact, when I got elected 3.5 years ago, we were being told we had tens of millions of dollars in surplus. We were fine. We sat down with our solid waste advisory task force with Burtech, and the vice president, I think he is, of Burtech said he was shocked when he heard that we have a deficit, because that was not what was being reported to this body or to the community. And I'm not, listen, I can barely count to 20 with my shoes off, okay? I'm not an accountant. But when I have a finance director sitting down with me with a spreadsheet saying, okay, here's our money in, here's our money out, this is how we do it, and here's our deficit. It's $750,000 for paramedic costs. Okay. And if we go back and listen to the audio for the last 3.5 years, the conversation's been had several times. How are we going to fix our paramedic deficit? That was what was being said. Paramedic deficit. How are we going to fix that? Never was it a structural deficit in our entire general fund, because that was not what was being reported to any of us. Now we have transparency. It makes sense now why so many projects were being deferred, and council was being told no on several projects. And it didn't make sense to me. We're not the city of Yucaipa savings and loan. We don't sit on taxpayer dollars unless our city is fine. If our roads are immaculate and our police are well funded and staffed, then fine, we can have a lot of money in reserves. But if we have messed up roads and we have crime problems and all these other issues, We shouldn't be saving all this money because we have a lot of money we need to fix our city. And so that's what the last 3.5 years of city councils have been doing, is investing in the city. We've increased staffing at our sheriff's department. It hasn't been done in 30 years because we were told we have the money to do it, when in fact we didn't have the money to do it. So to answer your question, sir, we knew in 2020 that we had a $750,000-ish deficit to our paramedic fund exclusively, because the prior tax measure from 97, if I remember correctly, that funded paramedics didn't have an escalator, so we knew that was the thing. It was not reported to us that we had a $7 million structural deficit. In fact, when that man told me that we have a $7 million structural deficit in May of last year, I'm like, no, you messed up. Try again. Go back to the drawing board. That's not right. How can we go from millions and millions of dollars in revenues or in surplus to $7 million in structural deficit? Next question.
And my name is Jo Sutt, and budgeting is budgeting, whether you're talking about city level or household level, except city level is way more complex and has a lot more zeros. But I'm telling you that low-income people in this community, this is just a small suggestion, low-income people in this community, particularly seniors, are having to choose to do without air conditioning or heat. And this room is freezing cold.
Thank you. We got to do something. I think we're freezing up here too.
All of the city buildings, as far as I'm concerned, are freezing cold when you go in. And we do need to be using our resources more wisely. And if we're talking about closing the senior center, where are people supposed to go for cooling centers, except for in the city buildings that are freezing? Is this colder than my freezer at home? I'm done.
So to piggyback on that, ultimately, I said at the last meeting, I think we all know, right? This body doesn't have the authority to raise it to. We're not the king. We can't levy a tax and just be done with it, right? This is up to the communities if we decide. And I hear what you're saying. My grandmother's on a fixed income. She's certainly sensitive to any type of increase. Should the voters of the city ultimately decide that a 1 or 1.5% sales tax is warranted, when I'm speaking to my grandmother about this, she was shocked and scared. She doesn't eat out, very, very rarely, and if she does, I'm paying for it. She does get all of her groceries delivered from a service here in town, and her pharmaceuticals. None of that is affected by this, whatever proposed sales tax this is. This sales tax, as it was displayed on page 20, or slide 20, doesn't apply to groceries, medicine, pharmaceutical, personal services, or rent, or real estate. Should that be an option we entertain? Because it is scary, and it scares me to think that something that would escalate. Waste is something she does pay for on her parcel tax, because that was decided that should be on a parcel tax. So as it relates to the waste, I think, and I correct me if I'm wrong, Brett brought it up. What was reported earlier was the 19%. Is it rounded here to 20%, or is there another? Is it 19% increase, and then now we're entertaining another 20% increase?
No. So what is up for discussion at the next city council meeting is a change to the agreement with Burtech. So one of the aspects of that agreement is the money that is paid from Burtech, the percentage that is collected, it's a percentage of revenue collected from Burtech that they remit to the city to reimburse the city's costs related to that service, right? So, and that's called the franchise fee. The idea being that the city does have real costs associated with that service. Those trucks are heavy. In some of our neighborhoods, those trash trucks are the heaviest trucks that typically go on those streets, right? So wear and tear on streets, especially with a lot of the more recent state mandates related to recycling organics. Burtech shoulders a lot of that responsibility, but a lot of it also falls to city staff. So there are city costs. The franchise fee percentage was, put into place when the contract was first adopted in the early 90s. It ramped up over a period of 3 years to 10%. It's been at 10% since 1996. Right? And so while there have been increases to the cost of trash fees over the years, those increases have gone to offset Burtex costs for providing the service,
Not the cities.
nothing that flowed to the city. So the franchise fee is what's being discussed.
Right. So not Brett, Granlund, Mr. Granlund, not a 19% increase, and then now in 21 being entertained. It was one trash-related expense increase being presented at the next meeting to go from the 1996 rate to 2024 to offset the costs, the franchise fees. So I want to make sure, because when you said it, I was dismayed a little bit that we'd be entertaining almost 40% increase.
No.
All right, next question.
Hi, Martha Glupka. Oops. You can hear me?
Yep,
Okay.
loud and clear.
Good evening. I'm going to kind of address what the man back there had brought up. He's trying to figure out what got us here. And I think he's talking about more recently. Is that correct? Okay. Okay. And I don't think that's been addressed. I think a lot of things got addressed up here, but I think we're skating around what got us here. Starting 2 years ago, when we dismissed our city manager and attorney, they had just had their contracts renewed months prior, and that was an expense to
How
buy
much?
out those contracts.
How much did you say that was?
It was not disclosed to us.
I think it was 6 months. 6 months of his salary.
On both Ray and
David Snow had no contract.
David Snow had.
Ray
no
Casey had a
contract.
$150,000 buyout.
Okay, okay, so, but that's one thing. These are things that aren't being covered up here. Then when the city decided to get a attorney firm, when there was a recall issue, and you went with, and I never understood that. You went with a private firm in Los Angeles to sue the citizens here. I didn't understand that when we had Steve Graham here, that should have probably taken care of that without you having that added expense. Also, there's some pretty lucrative contracts that were made at the beginning.
What lucrative contracts, ma'am?
Chris Mann, for one.
$50,000 less than his predecessor was making. That's not lucrative. That's a pay cut and a savings to the city.
Well, okay, but
You can
Ray
Google it
was
if
here
you
for
like.
how
I'm not
long?
making the stuff up.
No, but how long was Ray here?
Right.
Let's.
20 years.
Okay, so
So we still, again, it was a,
there was a
he made
reason.
less.
There was experience versus not experience, for one.
Okay.
And you told us to give you 6 months,
Mhm.
correct? And be patient. But a lot of things got spent. Let's look at the $4 million loaned to a private citizen. Now, if I'm not mistaken, you were just saying Yucaipa is not a savings and loan. Well, is that really true, Mayor? Are we not a savings and loan when we went ahead and footed $4 million to a private citizen
I'd be happy
that
to address
borders
that.
five
Are you-
widths?
are you done?
Okay,
Would you
can
like me
I-
to address
no,
that?
I'm not done yet.
Well, hold on. We're going to do one at a time. You answer the question, he'll answer it, then we'll keep on going. I like
Okay.
this. I like this dialogue. Go ahead, Chris.
One of the city manager's roles in Yucaipa, as is common in cities, is to also serve as the city's treasurer. City's treasurer's responsibility is to look over the investments of city assets, right? The funds in city's various accounts. City managers do that with the assistance of the finance department, legal counsel, right? Most of historically, chunk of our cash is kept in the local agency investment fund called LAIF. LAIF has historically very low rates of return, right? But it's a safe investment. It's run by the state, but very low rates of return. The city is in the process of looking at the Five Winds property. And I won't get into the whole strategy behind the Five Winds build-out and why the city has an interest in having an option to eventually decide whether or not to acquire the 80 acres owned by Mr. Koyman adjacent to the Five Winds property, right? The city had an opportunity to secure a 3-year option, meaning we're not committing to buying the property. We don't have to commit for 3 years. We can wait and put a draft plan together, see where the city is financially at that point. But in the meantime, our ability to exercise that option is there. It won't be sold out from under us. That property was zoned for and had a housing tract approved on it. We can protect that property from being built as housing while we have that option available. And in the meantime, to secure that option, we provided a loan to the property owner at an interest rate of, memory serves, I believe it was 7%. Is that right, Phil? Far greater than any of the city's other investments, right? So it wasn't the spending of money. It was money that otherwise would have been sitting in LAIF, earning much lower percentage, and the city's not committed to anything. When the time comes, should the city choose not to exercise that option, all of that money comes back to the city, and we will have earned much more than had that money remained sitting in LAIF. I would like for us to stay focused in this discussion on solving for the problem, which is our structural budget deficit. That's why we're here today. Now, you can pick at any one expenditure decision, any one staffing decision, right? Those decisions aren't what caused the problem we're faced with today. If we get to a point where the community says, no more revenue, right? Solve this problem with cuts. We will. That's our job. And every staffing position will be looked at across the board. And you better believe that if we're in a position where we have to make cuts to public safety, those cuts are going to go across the board. Every department's going to be looked at. So I would like for us to stay focused on the discussion at hand, which is how do we solve this structural budget deficit?
Ms. Klepka, continue.
Okay, I see the point you're making, Chris, about staying on point, but the band back there wanted to know what had gotten us there. And I think we've had some frivolous spending this past 2 years, some bad decisions.
Okay.
So given that, we need to make up the revenue. I understand
You're right. And I just said that for the last 3.5 years, I've been told we have $50 million in surplus by a man I'm supposed to trust. $50 million in surplus. We have a $7 million structural deficit.
Correct.
Because we were borrowing from funds that we didn't have a development impact fund to support some of our builds. That was some funny math. And I asked Phil, I said, Phil, last year, Phil, can you recreate the budget from last year so I can see it? How do we get here? Is it embezzlement? How do we get there? No, it's the way he was moving numbers around, the last finance director and the last city administration. We shouldn't be in this situation.
No, we shouldn't.
We shouldn't be $7 million. And then I get paid $600 a month to sit here and listen, okay? $600 a month. It's not an exorbitant salary, okay?
Right.
Certainly it's not. When he told me there's a $7 million structural deficit, I said, oh, I'm moving to Norco. Good luck. What in the world? So when I was an Explorer Scout in the brand new City Hall, that's when the problem started. We built a Taj Mahal of a City Hall, and it's beautiful, designed by our high school students, and it's great. It costs money. Mm-hmm. And when I was an Explorer Scout, I walked on that carpet, and I walked by that furniture that was still there up until last year. Maybe responsible, right? We're not maintaining anything.
No, carpet's still there, sorry.
Oh, the carpet's still there. But the problem is things fall apart, and we have to maintain them. It's a responsibility of government to maintain what we have, the investments, right? So
Correct.
I tell my wife all the time, stop skipping your oil change. Your car's going to break. Well, I don't want to spend it on that. I'd rather spend it on a Michael Kors purse or whatever. Okay, but we have to buy a new car. Same thing in public works, right? They want to continue putting required maintenance into their vehicles, and we've just deferred them another year because we don't have the money to do it, because we're making decisions based on what we have to do, when all along we should have not been building these enormous, we shouldn't have. Slow growth, but we're like, no. The idea, like you said, and from talking to past councilmen, our previous mayor, yeah, the idea was build the houses, build the population to support the economy through expenditures, and then the revenues will come in. But it just didn't happen as fast as it should have. And maybe in 20 years, maybe at build out, when our population is 80,000, that's 20,000 more than we are now, and we have the freeway corridor specific plan and Mr. Grantland's proposal of repealing Measure O, and we have Target and Walmart and Kmart. We'll bring that back, and Mervyn's, all there on the freeway corridor specific plan.
Please.
And we have the revenues coming in. Then look at hindsight being 2020. They were right. It worked. The problem is for the next 10 to 15 years until we get there, we're getting rid of our school resource officers when there's school shootings on the rise. We're getting rid of our solutions-oriented policing team who have driven down our homeless crime in the city. We're getting rid of, all right, can somebody scroll down to the public safety cuts? The top one, reduce one deputy, oh, it's already there. Scroll back up, says $300,000. That's a gross exaggeration of our city manager's salary, so there's a $300. That's 3% of our problems if we got rid of our city manager contract right now. We're still not fixed. We're still broken. And if I try to find a volunteer city manager, we just won't have one. I guarantee nobody's gonna come do this job for volunteer money.
Well, I think I think what bothers me about all of this right now is bringing up especially our police, our fire. That's not an option. That shouldn't even be on the board.
But I
Because
agree.
it's not optional.
No, I agree. But you saw, so where else? What, even if we don't reduce, we cut no deputies. Let's say we do entertain the idea of swapping, go back down to just cuts, taxes off the table. Swap one deputy with a community resource officer. We're still having a person showing up to your house to take a report if you need it. Still set of eyes and ears on the road with a trained radio that can report suspicious behavior. So no eliminating school resource officer, right? Uvalde was horrible, we don't want to do that. Do we eliminate the SOP team and go back to the way we were? Maybe, let's do that. Let's take away the SOP team for $200,000. Below that? There you go. No. Eliminate that one too. Who needs training? Eliminate the training. We'll see, we'll push back on our county and say, you need to train the deputies before they get here. That's not our responsibility. We're not going to close the fire station because that's silly. I think our CAL FIRE might have something to say about that. But let's delay the ladder truck. Let's delay that, even though we have high rises and wide rises now. Scroll up. Where are we at? We still need about $9 million in revenue. And that's with the imaginary getting rid of the, actually, no, check the one deputy service. Because I know somebody keep on saying the exorbitant salaries at City Hall. So cut the $300,000. Where are we at? Yeah, we're still there.
Well, I do think we need to bring in revenue. I agree with that.
I
Completely.
agree.
I mean, there's no doubt about that. And it doesn't, not little revenue, we need to bring in some big revenue right away.
But I think you're right. I think whoever said it also earlier, furloughs, maybe. I don't know if that would work.
That was my
hiring
next
freezes, maybe we stop hiring altogether. If we're able to,
That's what I was going to suggest.
hiring freezes, okay?
You need to have a hiring
Fine.
freeze
But
and
that-
raises.
But let me ask you them real quick, because this is the town hall dialogue. Based on current staffing, if we freeze all positions, does that do anything for this deficit?
Yeah, so we've,
Ma'am, I'm trying to fix the problem. Yeah, expanding the problem is a problem as well, but that's not going to fix it.
yeah. Well, okay, we can address that because, again, misinformation. I'm sorry.
Hold on, stop.
Less than incomplete information, right?
Miss Wong, hold on a second.
So we currently have 5 positions in the city that are vacant that we've frozen, right? One thing we haven't talked about tonight, but we've talked about in the council chambers during meetings, is that when we started down the cycle for this fiscal year, this upcoming fiscal year, the beginning of that cycle starts with the departments. And so we go to the departments and we say, okay, put together your draft budgets. Let us know what it is you think you need to operate optimally in the coming fiscal year. This year we said we're running a deficit, so be cautious. Don't include anything that's not absolutely necessary, but tell us honestly what you feel you need to operate. The departments compiled that, submitted it to the finance department. Finance department compiled it. And the number that came back was really shocking. The deficit had grown to $15 million, right? So over the period of a couple months, we met with each department, went line by line and said, okay, what can be cut back? The scary thing for me, one of the scary things, was that not a lot of it was fluff, right? For the most part, now there was some fluff, but for the most part, what was contained in those draft budgets were things that we really should be doing as a city, right? And to cut back from that $15 million number to the $7.3 million that was adopted last week by the city council, some of that is deferred maintenance, some of it is equipment and supplies. For example, a fire engine that has exceeded its useful life, it should be replaced. That gets deferred another year. We have a bad need based on our call volume for medical squad and EMS squad, so okay, we're going to delay that. So we got down to $7.3 million. We also looked, as we went department by department, what positions that are vacant could not be filled, what could be frozen now. So we identified 5 positions that are vacant that could be filled. Let me address, and I know Phil can touch on this too, but let me address those positions, because I want people to understand it, right? We have currently probably 100 or so temporary or part-time employees in the city. Most of those employees are in the Community Services Department. Some of them are in Public Works. There is a new law that went into effect in California, went into effect in January, that essentially says if you have temporary employees that are performing the same exact job function as full-time employees in the city, that at any point, the employee association, the union could come to you and say, we want those employees to have an MOU, and we want the MOU to have all the same benefits and terms that our full-time employees have, and by law, we have to do it. They could come to it.
Colleen, stop interrupting. You can ask your question when we're done, right?
We'll be happy to give you the microphone if you'd like to speak when it's your turn. So if, finance analyze that, and my gosh, if our, now, this applies to our Public Works temporary employees, not our community service employees, because in community service, the temporary employees perform functions that are different from what our full-time employees do. In Public Works, our 7 temporary employees perform essentially the same job functions that our full-time people employ. So we are in a position where if the union were to come to us tomorrow and say, we're triggering this law, we have to provide the same terms that we provide to our full-time employees to all 7 of those temporary employees. That is a significant cost increase. So what we're doing is, what we're proposing is swapping out those 7 temporary employees for 3 part-time Public Works employees, right? So, and that cost is slightly greater than what we're currently paying for the 7 part-time, but much less expensive than if that law got triggered and we had to provide those 7 full-time. Now, once that law is triggered, we can't fire them. I mean, we could, but we'd have to go through the whole process. They're covered by the union, right? They're represented employees. All right, now, the 4th position you mentioned, that is another one of those Public Works positions. Currently up in Five Winds, we have a contract with a landscape company to provide the landscape services for the Five Winds Ranch property. Recently, Community Services has started allowing dry camping up at Five Winds. So one of the issues with that is we don't have staff up there full-time. So if someone's dry camping up there and some need arises, there's some issue, we don't have staff that are there to handle that. So the 4th Public Works position is designed to replace the contract. We're going to get rid of that part of the contract, and we'll have a person that handles all the landscaping up there and can respond to the needs of people that are camping up there. And that financially is approximately a wash because we're limiting the contract. So yes, technically, like I said, there are 4 positions being proposed, but when you look at the totality of the situation, it's not that we're just adding 4 positions.
Chris, the last part of that, it was actually not a wash, it was a gain of about $30,000 on the last
So
component.
we gained $30,000 by hiring 4 people?
No, so Chris is, the fourth person, the reduced scope of the landscaping contract saved us an amount. The cost of bringing on 1 additional, the fully burdened cost, the net of those 2 was a $30,000 net gain back to the city.
For that 1 position, understood.
The first 3, based on the changes in the legal requirements, the cost of temporary staffing, plus the additional things that we had to do to bring on the full-time component, was essentially a wash between the way the first 3 were a wash. Reducing the 7 temps to bringing the 3 on was a wash.
Okay. Martha,
I
what
only
else
have
we got?
one more thing. I've got, and it's a suggestion, I've got 2 daughters, both are human resource directors for international companies. And these last couple of years have been really hard on most companies, as you know. What they have done, and it's just an idea, they've done layoffs, they've had to, obviously. And the other thing they've done is they've frozen wages, frozen wages. But what they've done is, based on merit, they're giving bonuses. And if you're not doing your job, no bonus. But it's one way to keep quality work, yeah, and save some money. So just an idea. It could be negotiated. I think Stephen was saying Stephen's not here tonight. I think he was saying you can go back to the table and renegotiate. That would possibly be one idea, but I know that both of my daughters with both the different companies, they're both in different companies, that's what they've done.
So I've worked, and certainly that's something
And not everybody merits a raise, so.
Yeah, and certainly that's something this council has to entertain, the government has to look into that as well, but I do know and I don't know all the rules. I've worked for both private sector and government. I think the rules are different as it relates to bonuses for the private sector and for government. Something I'm thinking is I could be wrong, but there's like a gift of public funds when it comes to a bonus if it's not done the right way. The private industry, it's my money, I can give you as much as I want to. I loved my bonuses at the railroad. Why went back to the police department? All right. Let's give Ms. Wong the mic.
So you currently have temporary employees, and what you're saying is they have protections, and the reason that you want to put them as full-time employees is because you can't let a temporary employee go. Is that correct?
No.
Is that what you just said?
No.
No.
He said he couldn't let a temporary employee
That's not what he said.
go.
That's not what he said, that. Colleen, that's not what he said.
Okay.
So here's what he said. Here's what he said. Can I explain it to you?
Yes.
Okay, so here's what he said. We have 7, and feel free to step in because I'm not the expert. We have 7 temporary employees that are currently offsetting the work of our overworked public works crew because they need to cover all 209 miles of roadway and everything else.
Yeah.
If the union comes to the city tomorrow and says, per this law, we want to give them the MOU, they're not temporary.
And they get full benefits.
They're not temporary anymore.
Right.
They're protected in their job positions. So now we're talking about cuts again. Do we get rid of the 7 positions because we want to save the money? But then, I'm telling you right now, if I'm working for the city of Yucaipa and I just lost the help and I'm still responsible, I'm quitting. I'm going to work for Redlands. Because we're getting eaten alive on social media because our roads are in such horrible disrepair. And we don't have a roads crew. We have Public Works that handles all the roads. We have Public Works that handles all the landscaping on city properties.
So you have the 7 guys, and now you want 4, to hire 4.
Instead of the 7, 4.
Instead of the 7
Yes.
temporary, you
Yes.
want to hire 4 that are going to be full-time employees.
Yes.
Well, and again, to be clear, 3 full-time employees to replace those 7. Separately, 1 full-time employee to replace the contract that we have up at 5 Winds.
That's still 4 new employees when we're in a deficit. That's 4 new employees. When we are in a deficit, you should be in a hiring freeze.
Okay.
It's a loss. Actually, it's a gain of $30,000 to us.
How is that a gain?
It's called numbers. It's math. It doesn't lie. I mean, it's cheaper to have full-time employees, 4, than 7.
And then you can't get rid of them. And
Again,
it's a
we wouldn't be able to get rid of them
permanent
one-
position ongoing forever.
So when the new log's triggered, we won't be able to get rid of them either. Now we're stuck with 7, not 4.
You can let them go.
Say again? I didn't understand that.
It's all a game you're playing.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. I'm too old for games. Next speaker, please.
You're not too old, Mayor. We're all too old.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate that.
First of all, I appreciate this situation and the concerns we have, and I agree with Brett. I guess he's gone now, but that's a long-term plan to start trying to bring back, the big boxes and things like that. And we need to bring in the right businesses as well. It can't be willy-nilly, and there is a way to certainly preserve Yucaipa's rural nature. The general plan lays that all out, but that's not the comment. And I agree with some of the comments that have been made on ways to cut. But first of all, I would not, and I think most people would not be in favor of a cannabis business program. I just think I think this got to the high school and they let each other know, and that's where all those votes came from. But I just wanted to point out one thing. In addition to what's been said, I think we need to put everything on the table and really look at it line by line. And I was looking just myself this afternoon and looking at our budget, our past budgets. And I know this isn't popular, but for private industry, during COVID, we had hiring freezes, we had salary freezes because we were trying to keep people, at least have some salary and be employed. So we all agreed that we would take, we would have hiring freezes. And on average in private industry, and I'm a part of a company, it's about 30,000 people now, but on average on an annual basis, we have about a 3.5% increase in wages. Some get more, some get less, but on balance, it's about a 3.5%. Except for this last year, it was 5%. And so I was looking at our past budgets, and back in 2018, 2019, our budget was for salaries was under $7 million, $6.8 million. Last year, it was $10.7 million, and the proposed budget coming up is $14 million, $13.957 million. Now, the proposed salary increases for 24-25 are 31% higher than they were this year, 31%. I'll tell you, in private industry, we couldn't sustain that. And from 2019 to present, which is about 6 years, salaries have doubled. The salary benefits have doubled. And I'm not sure why, but I think we really need to take a hard look at this. If we were to give all of our staff members here and we appreciate all the work that's done, certainly, but if we were to give them, say, a 3% or let's say 3% raise, which was probably consistent with private industry, that would be an increase over last year's budget from 10.7 to about 11 million. Right there, we would be saving $3 million. That's about a third of what some of the problem we have up there. So I think we need to put everything on the table and really take a hard look at every single line item. Some of these are in big buckets and we don't know what's in the buckets, but just on that one item alone, it looks like there could be some significant savings because it looks a little bit off balance to say that we have a 30% increase in salaries and benefits in 1 year.
So I think these, and
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll have our finance department answer the details of the numbers, but let me just start by saying this problem is so big that we will likely get to a point where we're looking at some combination of having to generate additional revenue and also cut back. We're very cognizant of the fact that cutting back entails a reduction of services if we're talking about cutting positions. But I will tell you, if we get to the point where we're looking at cutting, those cuts will have to be across the board. And we'll have to look at things like furloughs or whatnot to reduce staffing costs, and we will. And I'll lead by example. I will accept a pay cut myself when we get to that point. But I want to make sure that the numbers are gone through by our finance department because 30% in 1 year, certainly staff did not receive a 30% raise in 1 year, but let me have Phil address those numbers.
Yeah, the top line, 30% increase is, it sounds excessive. Anna, do you have the budget book? No? Okay. In our budget book, there's a personnel page. Of the 30%, roughly $3 million increase, if you look at the temporary staffing, end of the year fiscal 25 budget is $2.5 million of temp staffing. Last year, it was 1.2. There's a $1.3 million increase in temp staffing. And the reason for that is almost 100% related to a community services program that ramped up. And that particular program is 100% funded in a partnership with the school district. So they ramped up the staffing that's necessary to provide the extra programming through the STARS program, all of that funding is being paid by the school district. But when you look top number, year-to-year increase, $1.5 million of that increase is related to a community services program. That's really not a core service of the city. We're just providing the service, being reimbursed by the school district. So half of that 30% is related to temp staffing for one program, not full-time salary increases, new positions, or anything like that.
Is that STARS?
STARS program.
Yeah, which again is 100% the cost, 100% covered through the grant that flows through the school district. So if you're only looking at the expenditure line on staffing and you're not going back and looking at the revenue side, it looks like, I got 1.5 million for that program, but it's really not costing the city anything.
Right, and so the net cost of the STARS program is zero for the city. We incur the cost, we pay the temporary staffing, the school district reimburses us dollar for dollar on that, for that particular program. As we whittle down to, from that 30%, the full-time staffing, based on the negotiations that happened last May, there's a 4.4% increase in that two-year agreement. The fiscal year 25 impact is 4.4%. So if you were to look to say, hey, what was the increases that are in the budget for fiscal 25, it's a 4.4%. $350,000 is the number, roughly, of what the quantified dollar amount of the increase is. So not the $3 million, but if we're looking at, apples to apples, what is the percentage raises across the board for the COLA? It's 4.4%, $350,000 roughly. Yeah, so a lot of context in there. A significant portion of that is the benefits component of that. So we participate in the CalPERS retirement plan. CalPERS tells us these are your funding rates every year based on how the money's doing with CalPERS. They'll say your rates increased. They usually don't say they decreased. They told us again, they increased, and so a lot of the 10% is tied into the pension benefit rates. Oh, absolutely. Pensions are a benefit to the employee, yes. Not negotiated by the city. The city, like most all municipalities, is a part of CalPERS, and CalPERS, based on their actuarial evaluations, rolls out the rates every year and says, here's your increase. It's a significant, every year it's a significant cost to municipalities, the benefits component, but the city doesn't have negotiation opportunities with those, but certainly a benefit to the employees.
Question coming in?
Yeah,
Ready?
next question.
And a comment. Donna Snodgrass, you took the words right out of my mouth. As far as the benefit rate for those increases, CalPERS started about 10 years ago, a smoothing program to make up for the deficit that we had early 2008-9 when everything tanked. The government entities, including cities, are now making up for making up for that deficit. It has to be paid by the employer. So that smoothing program is an amortization program for the employer's contribution side of it. So that's where some of those extra benefits are coming from, and the reason it's being raised is that, quote, smoothing program increases every year to pay back those benefits, those investments that were lost. Back to police and fire. The fire department, CAL FIRE, is in collective bargaining right now for its rank and file, and I fully believe there's going to be a salary increase and or a reduction in their work week. Right now they work 72 hours. They're inching closer and closer to 56 hours a week like most other fire departments every time they have a new contract. So that's going to be either overtime for our chief to manage the schedule down there or hire additional firefighters to cover the stations. All of those come with salaries and benefits that have to be covered. I would never, ever suggest cutting fire or police. Public safety is off the table for me. So that means we have to find a way to pay for it. I don't agree with the result. Well, I can't. It is the results. I don't like it because I would never vote for cannabis licensing personally. But I have to realize that I'm I'm in the sit down and shut up generation now, and the millennials and others are reaching 18 years old, and they're the voters, and they're more in favor of that than most of us sitting here in this room tonight. It's just a reality. Would I vote for it? No. Would I suggest it? No, I don't like it one bit. If it were on the ballot today, I bet it would pass, considering the overall age of the city right now. Everything I had to say was said tonight, so I'm really glad that we're all on the same page. And I'd like to point out, with all the chatter online this week or the last 2 weeks, I counted earlier, there were about 60 people here tonight, not including staff. So all the others that I was hoping would be here to have input didn't show up. So you guys make the decision on what you received online and what you're hearing, but I think most of us are in agreement. I'm glad, Chris, that you said you would take a salary cut, because one of my comments was a 5% salary reduction for all the managers. And when collective bargaining comes around for city employees, negotiate no raises or a salary cut. I don't know that you would be successful in getting the union to agree with that, but I wouldn't take that off the table. And if you're going to cut any staffing, you said it would be across the board, so that took that off. And that's it. Public safety's off the table. After hearing your explanation on the cap on sales taxes, I was going to say 3/4 to 1% if it was designated for public safety. But if we don't do the 1.5, it sounds like the county's going to take us to the cap anyway, and we won't get any of that extra.
Now you'd be paying for the freeway up in Victorville.
So, well, yeah, and I noticed that the list of cities with all the cannabis shops really weren't places I would want to live in.
What's wrong with Adelanto?
Keep nothing. You can play poker, I guess. So if we don't capture that revenue, unfortunately, the county's going to take it and distribute it other than here in Yucaipa. I don't like that either, but if it gives us a chance to keep it all here in the city, I might reconsider that. There's one other thing that hasn't been talked about tonight. Is Mr. Granlund still down there? Did he leave? I'm glad he brought up what happened with Measure O, because I couldn't remember the measure number. I knew who caused it to happen, and I know how it tanked. I like the idea of repealing Measure O, but the freeway corridor specific plan has come back to the Planning Commission already. It was voted to hold over the vote on that because for many, many, many reasons. I'm torn in half because it includes now 2 1 million square foot warehouses on Live Oak Canyon Road. So the paperwork tells us that it'll be a $14 million revenue in development fees and other permits. How far down the road before we see that income, I don't know. That question wasn't answered. But I even voted no in holding it over. I was ready to vote no 2 weeks ago, a week ago. I can't remember when our last meeting was. But not one person from the community was there to speak in favor or against it, except Dr. Wong, who had some very good input. But the only people who were there were the trade union members, the lobbyists for the warehouses, and I wasn't comfortable voting on that at all, the way that was presented. One of them just made us feel ashamed of ourselves if we didn't pass it that night, and that right there made me, I would have voted no that night, the way that was presented. Ben did an outstanding job riding the heat and answering questions, but that's coming back. And think about that $14 million income for 2 warehouses that supposedly will never be able to see the way they're designed, et cetera, plus the other commercial areas, and I think it was 2,400 or 2,600 houses or living units along the freeway corridor. So that's my input. What do we do there? Because it's alive. How do we vote on that? If we repeal Measure O, how does that change the current iteration of the freeway corridor specific plan? Because now we can put those shopping places back in there.
So real quick, because I want to make sure that everybody's aware of it. It's been said a few times tonight already. Should this sales tax be on the ballot, there are 2 ways in which it can be presented as like it was, I think, Measure E in 2020 as a general fund tax, which requires 50% plus 1 of the voters to approve, or a public safety or a special tax, which requires two-thirds of the voters. So a much higher threshold. Now, should that fail, we'll go through some options. Let's just say on November 8th, we all enter the polling booth and we are faced with, should there be a 1.5% general fund tax, and we all vote no on it, okay? Then we still have a problem. If we vote yes on it, then we have the $9 million in expected revenue, general fund, right? Now, if we all decide, hey, we don't like that, it looks too much like Measure E, which in my mind, again, I voted no because it was a general fund tax as well, but I didn't like that it was very much painted as a public safety tax, but in fine print it said general fund. I didn't like that. But let's say we have it as a public safety tax, requires two-thirds of our population to vote yes on it, and let's say it fails. We're now November or January 1st, we're into the new year, and we now have to make cuts because we don't have any revenue to support. There is another way. I want the people in the community, if this is something we want and need, this doesn't have to be a government-driven initiative for a tax revenue. If you want a public safety tax, we require a two-thirds vote. Christina, if you want a public safety tax, it requires 50% plus one, because it's community-driven. Does that make sense? If the government initiates a public safety tax, it's two-thirds vote. Public safety. Again, I wasn't on. Hold on. Can we give her a microphone? Because nobody at home is hearing you. Just talk to me, Christine, okay?
You know, I have to tell you, we knew about this fire thing and the tax. You know, we already knew that. We knew it from many years ago. I watched you guys stress. You were so stressed when it lost, the measure lost, and you were wringing your hands. Should we close a fire station? Should we close the fire station and put a paramedic unit there? Should we do this? Should we do this? You guys were so stressed out, and we were so stressed out. And you decided, the city council decided, that they were going to use revenue from our coffers, because we had money in the coffers at the time, to supplement that. Mm-hmm. Well, it was a real drag because it would have cost the citizens $25 per person and averaged out $50 per household just in gas and groceries, and it didn't pass because people didn't trust the city council to spend the money. And now we're in this big quagmire of upside downness that we're not used to. And so the city that was so fiscally sound before, we were so proud of it. We had this ranking by the San Bernardino, it's the state of California has a ranking by the assessors. And we had an A+ rating. We suck right now. Mm-hmm. We absolutely suck. And I'm not going to blame the fire and the police because they're our heroes and they keep us safe, and whatever that costs. Every other city has the same issues we have with that and the roads. But what I want to say is that these aren't the only choices here. These are not the only choices, and taking community services and doing those type of things aren't our only vehicles for solving the problem.
What other option?
Well, I'll tell you what, these aren't them.
Well, tell me, what is it?
We could sit down and we could talk about it. We were talking, you guys are putting, isn't there another Trader Joe's coming in? Right? That's a wonderful thing. Thank God for Trader Joe's.
Do we have anticipated revenue from a Trader?
We can put a Costco in here, we could put a Target in here, but never ever forget the rural character of the city is the Yucaipa Boulevard is our main drag. That's our main drag. We have one high school. We're a family-oriented community. If we start polluting our city with all these high-density, low-income houses where they don't belong in our neighborhoods, and pot shops, there was an ordinance put by city council, you guys, several years ago that prohibited the sale of cannabis in this community. So now we're going to do an about-face and have 3 or 4 storefronts, when our whole goal is to develop the freeway corridor so people can go out off the exits and shop, spend their money, and come right back on the freeway, so they're not driving through our neighborhoods.
You're right. And let's just, I'm going to stop because I want to take one at a time. Just for, let's just say it's comparable. Do we know what Stater Brothers tax revenue a year gives us? A grocery store? How much money?
Phil, do you
Yeah,
one store? in which-
groceries are on the non-sales tax list, so.
No, like right now, how much tax revenue does the city get from Stater Brothers?
Yeah, grocery is not sales
Oh,
taxable,
we
so
don't get,
hardly.
so Trader Joe's won't give us any more
There
revenue.
are taxable items that are sold in a grocery store. The groceries themselves are not taxable.
Yeah, but the Trader Joe's is not a done deal.
It's true, it's not a
Yeah,
done deal.
guys,
I'm
let's
surprised.
not
In fact, the
speculate.
more we
Let's not
talk about it, the
speculate
more
on
we
it.
talk
Yeah,
about it,
that's
the
not-
less
yeah.
likely.
Yeah,
we are.
we're not sure that a 3 million square foot industrial building will bring us in that revenue and the infrastructure that we're looking for. And you know, when we looked at, Justin, when we looked at that list of people that have the cannabis, we don't want to be anything like them.
I don't,
Those were terrible cities.
hold on a second,
We just don't want to be anything
Hold on a
like
second, hold on a
them.
second. Let me address that.
Let me ask one question, though. That's all I want to know on the cannabis thing. Is there a correlation between a rise in public safety spending and cannabis
Yep.
shops? I don't know. I'm asking.
I can answer that. So, the answer is it depends, and it depends on how it's executed, right? There are cities that have opened it up and just allowed cannabis as if it's any other retail store, and it's kind of a free-for-all. And in those circumstances, yes, I think you see increased calls for services to those locations. There are other cities that do it in a much more regulated, controlled manner, where you limit the number of those types of permits that can be issued. You have regulations in place that require things like no loitering, 24-hour security, even things like how they're advertised. By looking at it from the outside, you're not even supposed to know it's cannabis,
Hey,
right? Like you can't have a cannabis.
Mr. Rexted, let's keep the small conversations, because I know the people around you
You
aren't
can't
able to
say
hear.
cannabis, it can't have a cannabis leaf or whatever, it has to be just, no off-site advertising, so you can't put up billboards. So there are ways that some cities have done it in a regulated manner where there are no increased calls for services. Your problems are much more the liquor stores and the bars, right, than cannabis. I'm not advocating, I'm just saying there are different ways that different communities approach it. Some have proven to be problematic, and some not so.
So at the end of the day, hold on a second. I don't want people, nobody up here is saying that we should have marijuana. So the question again was, is there a more of a higher cost associated with public safety for those cities that have cannabis in them? He did answer the question. It depends. With that being said, the instruction that the council has given staff individually and even from the diocese is find revenue. And they went out and found revenue. This is the options that they see it, right? Doesn't mean that this is what we're here talking. This is just, hey, these are all the options. It's up to you guys to decide. If the community had a hard time with a winery somewhere, I can only imagine that devil's lettuce isn't going to be welcome here neither. Okay? But this is something, that's why we're here talking about it, so that we can figure out what the temperature is in the community.
I have one
And
more
it's not 420 degrees, it sounds like. Sorry.
I have one more comment regarding housing and the amount of money on public safety and services. We know that housing is a drain in the long run on public services, right?
Yes.
$400 or $500 per resident off, right? One way or the other. So maybe we should consider not building so many houses
Yeah,
right
Newsom.
now, right?
We
Let's
should
just
stop
say,
building
hey,
houses.
we got to have a moratorium of some kind because
would-
we got to figure out these numbers.
That would be a violation of state law.
I understand,
Gotta
but
love Sacramento.
then tell the state they've got to pay the difference.
They love it when cities tell them to do stuff.
Yeah. Yep. Brian, Chris, I think Mary's had her hand up for quite a while.
Yeah.
Dr. Wong, too. Do you guys want to play
yes.
rock, paper,
Yeah.
scissors? All right, get
Yeah.
Mary. We'll get Dr. Wong next.
Okay, my name is Mary Reuter, and I am a resident of the North Bench. I also have a business in Uptown. I have two things to say. I'm going to try to keep it very, very quick, but most of you know that I... Okay. Number one, I truly, truly believe that our city officials and our council have far more knowledge about how to run a government than any of the individual citizens in our town. We all have our opinions. Now, I do not like to be taxed. Does anyone? But I truly understand that our tax system is what supports our government, what supports our community services, and all the infrastructure in our entire United States, not only our town. I am a big city girl. I'm from New Orleans. But I love living in Yucaipa because I feel incredibly safe here. And I appreciate how much the city and our police and fire have done to make me feel safer here. I continue to feel safe. So because of that, and I want our public safety budget to continue and to increase, I have no problem voting for a tax increase. Now, it's 1%, and I understand now that we still may have that increase if the county decides to do that, and then we get nothing. So I think people need to consider that. The other thing that I want to say is I would like for our city officials and our council to think very carefully about the cannabis business license program. But I am 100% in support of approving the cannabis industry in Yucaipa. I'm an old lady. I don't drink wine, but I do use marijuana. And many of my old lady and old gentleman friends do so. We go out of town to buy our cannabis because herbs are a good thing. Now, because I am in favor of this, I spent 8 months last year in 2003 researching the viability of starting a marijuana dispensary here in Yucaipa. 8 months. I do know how to do research. Most of you who know me know that I am very well educated. I went to a cannabis convention. I created a business plan. I presented it to some people in the city just to get some feedback, some council members just to get some feedback. And then I concluded that research by going to a very large cannabis convention because I needed to learn. I'm an educator. I need to learn. And when I went to that conference, I discovered that the cannabis industry is in a very precarious position right now, especially in California. And therefore, I pulled back and said, I can't do this, even though I had financial backing, I had investors. So I changed my mind. Yes, I think cannabis in Yucaipa, the way that this conservative city would bring that about, is a good thing. I don't want to have to go to Captain Jack's in Redlands and give them my, or is that San Bernardino?
San Bernardino.
Oh, wherever it is, and give them my money. I'd rather that tax base stay here. And I would like you to please look at that anticipated $1.5 million, knowing of revenue, knowing that the cannabis industry is in trouble in California. So, yes, I think we need it. A lot of old people use that. But please look and don't depend on $1.5 million to help us in this situation. And I know y'all are going to do a great job, and things will be done the best way to help the entire community, and y'all won't acquiesce to small groups of people.
What a crazy time we're living in. Listen, at the beginning of my career, which wasn't that long ago, because as Kevin said, I'm not that old, just the smell of marijuana was enough to have me stop in my tracks in my cop car, rush to jot down the address of the it was coming out of and write a search warrant to kick in your front door. And now, you guys were sitting in the meeting. The chief of police right there. Our laws have changed, man. It's crazy. All right, next question.
Dr. Wong.
Dr. Wong.
For those who don't know who I am, my name is Hanson Wong. I live in Yucaipa.
I don't think it's on.
I'm sorry.
There you go.
For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Hanson Wong, and I live in Yucaipa, District 1. A couple of things. I've been on a budget committee that had to go through bad times along with good. And making these decisions, I don't envy you guys at all. I mean, if the tax passes, then you got a fix. Not always an easy fix, not always the best fix, but it is a fix. If you don't get it, then you really have things you're going to have to deal with. And basically, hiring freeze on salary increases, and so on. But realizing the fact that you have some contractual obligations that you have to fulfill, that you cannot freeze the increase for a variety of reasons. But other than that, and in addition, you also have a compression issue that deals with your non-union employees as well. So all of that has to be taken into consideration. And so non-hires, you save money by taking the part-time employees and making them full-time employees. But if you didn't have those employees at all, then you would save even more money than the $30,000, although you would have less services. That's another choice that you would make, to have less services. But again, it is a choice that you might have to make. You talk about across the board. Normally, we don't look across the board. We look at the things that produce revenue, that provide the greatest service to the community or hospital or whatever it is. And so I think across the board sometimes is something that sounds fair but is not necessarily right for the government. And just to give you an example of that on structures and facilities, our equestrian center has come forward of creating the rodeo, being self-sufficient, and there's something that they do well. But there are other things that we've been trying for years. We might have to put it on hold, we might have to lease it out, but for all the work that Megan's puts into it, it's difficult at times for the YPAC, for this facility that's our socialization and so on, to actually not be in the red. So is that something we have to put on hold or possibly lease out in something? It's difficult for any organization, a government organization, to be in business other than running the government. So for us to be in real estate or entertainment, whatever, we have to have the right people and show the ability to do it, or we probably should not go into it because it'll dig a deeper hole for us. And at times like this, we have to also look at perception. Mr. Graham isn't here tonight, but he's pounded into my head that perception is everything to the public, and so we have to consider that. I disagree with quite a few items that were done by the city this year, and I'll mention a few of them. If a owner or a developer comes with a land project, we have to fulfill our obligations to them. But if the city has a land project, we really don't have to put that in the forefront, whether it was council members or the city itself that brought the wine project in. It was a city or a initiated project. It's not initiated by landowners, and the timing to me was incorrect in spending the money for the 3 meetings, spending our staff time, and spending the money for a poll, and spending the money for in my mind, my accounting, a useless a finance report that only promoted maximum use and the revenue that we would get, but we would have to delay any thoughts on expenses because we couldn't figure it out. But there are a lot of things we don't figure out that we actually make projections for anyway. As far as this problem we have, many people have already said it's not a new problem. It's been brought up by our city manager, but it's been there for many years. In fact, our former administrations have projected to now and to the future that we would be in trouble unless we did something to take care of it. Unfortunately, what we saw or heard was the fact that we had a surplus, but not the fact that eventually we were going to be in a pit so deep that we're going to cry. And I think if we don't address this problem soon, we will be in those kind of problems. Now, back to my question about perception. Again, the perception, already I've spoken about the wine country. We have to look at the bigger picture of when we look at interests and so on. Obviously, the 80 acres give us a higher interest, but you're caught up in a bind that if I had it in the states or the fund, lower interest available on the same day. I call the state and say, I need $5 million. By that afternoon of the next working day, I would have it. If you loan it out for 3 years, it's stuck for 3 years. You can't take it back from him. So again, it might have been the right thing to do, but you went ahead in a bad time to loan the money and not be able to retrieve it if we get in a bad way. Now, I hear it from both sides. Oh, we're not so bad right now. We have to take care of it before it goes. Well, we're so bad right now, we need to think about removing fire stations and police and protection services that I think is not something we should look at. But anyway, it's just something you have to look at. So I also concerned about the land use projects. We really need to know what is it that people want to buy to come in the city. Is it senior housing? Is it affordable housing? Is it other housing? We have certain codes in a general plan that we're obligated to give the landowners and developers, but we're not obligated to give them increased land usage above that. And when we do, we're actually increasing the density and increasing the amount of personnel that's going to require services that we're going to have to pay for. We really need to consider those things, and unless they're investing into our city and giving us things that we need to say, hey, this is what you're due, we're going to give it to you. But this is not what you do. And not everything is a yes or no, even though some people say you have to vote yes or no right now. Sometimes we don't have enough time. You have families, you have your work, you need that information in order to do things. You might say, just like the Planning Commission did, they postponed it a month so they can get enough information to make the right decisions. I would admonish the City Council to do the same thing. So consider what is right, consider what the perceptions are. Please do what is needed for the city, but listen to the city as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Mr. Mayor, might I suggest it's 8:53, so as we approach 9 o'clock, that might be a good stopping point.
How many more people wish to be heard?
These two gentlemen here, 3,
1, 2,
4.
3, 4.
Try to keep it to a minute each.
So listen, we can either take a break. We can take a break and come back and hear, or if you guys, do we have pretty long, drawn-out comments that need to be heard? No? Let's muscle through it. All right, let's go over here.
Hi there. So my name is Brandon Mild, longtime resident. Family's been here 5 generations. I work at RE/MAX here on the boulevard. I know everybody, and I'm a numbers guy. looking at this, and I've had to balance HOAs and everything else in between that I've run, and I know the position you're in when you're being blasted at right now by everybody else and you're trying to solve an issue. However, the 1.5% tax increase, how long does that sustain us? That's one of my questions. It solves the problem now, but does it solve the problem 5 years from now? Or are we back to square one?
Phil?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we're talking about now is solving the problem right in front of us. One of the issues that kind of got us here is diverging revenue, expenditures growing faster than revenues. And so an inflow of revenues that solves the problem today, if we stay on the same track of diverging expenses and revenues, tomorrow we're right back to where we are. The second part, that once we figure out where we're headed to solve it now, the second part of that is to peg expenditure growth to revenue growth. And that's another strategy discussion to say, how exactly do we do that? Especially when our two biggest contracts are public safety and we don't negotiate those. And so that's really tough to peg to revenues. But that's something that is on the finance side. A lot of people that aren't numbers guys don't even pay attention to that. But that's something to say, hey, when I'm working with the city manager, to say, what number are we using to solve for? I'm like, well, when do we have the solution? Do we have it now, or do we have it in 2 years? Because in 2 years, it's a different number. That's the short answer. Is second part of the strategy is we have to peg expenditure growth to no more than revenue growth.
So do we anticipate, so let's just say for hypothetical, a 1.5%, let's say that's the only revenue we get, where nothing else goes. So we have, well, actually that has to, we're still short. Click on,
I think I follow you. So if we got to $9 million, right?
Yeah.
$9 million out of the 10. Well, right now, we've got a $7.3 million deficit. The $10 million based on when that comes in, we're a year out, we're closer to the $10 million. One thing to point out is there's things that we're doing behind the scenes, smaller types of fixes that we're trying to be more effective and more efficient on the operation side. So 9, I don't mean to say that 10 doesn't matter. 9, we'll take it. And so if we got there, we can look to say, all right, we solved it. Let's peg on the growth side where we have to be really conscious of any decision and what's the impact tomorrow to that. How's that going to grow? And we would do that through strategy and budgets and all of that, and compilation of city staffing structures. All of that would go into that lift.
that, and then, real quick, sorry, our economic development team, Ryan is a rock star. Chris, or do we anticipate, I mean, from your 30,000 foot level, do we anticipate if we secure, let's just say a $9 million sales tax revenue on a year by year basis, will that buy us enough time with just our inflation for Ryan and his team and under your leadership to secure more revenue to bridge the gap?
Well, yeah, building off of what Phil said, I think combining, okay, we solve the problem for today, we get to our goal, and then we agree on a strategy where we're not going to increase costs over revenue from that point forward. Also, big emphasis on economic development so that revenue grows consistently over time.
Sure.
So that we can keep up with cost increasing moving forward. So it's hard for me to say in 5 years we'll have X amount of revenue from economic development. You know, we have a lot of projects coming down the pipeline. We have 2 hotels in the pipeline. We have, you know, the warehouse projects that were mentioned. We have stores coming down. Yucaipa Point is still being developed out. There are still opportunities there. So, and then, you know, the freeway corridor has, you know, if the freeway corridor specific plan update is ultimately approved, the warehouse project that was mentioned today, part of what they have to do is bring infrastructure across the freeway, which then opens up development opportunity along the freeway corridor. We could be looking at tremendous revenue growth in the future, but again, that's, you know, years down the road. It's impossible to predict today how many years that will take and exactly how much revenue that will be.
I got a question from Brandon. How many houses do we sell in Yucaipa? Resell?
That I have
Say
no
a
idea
year,
off my head. Do you know? I said that I don't know off the top of my head.
Single family, right now, we're probably selling around 50 a month.
50 a month?
Yeah.
So if we had a transfer tax on that, say 5%, you know, on a sold home, that'd bring us in about 5 million on 1,000 homes, right?
But now you're taking money out of the seller's pockets.
What about the buyer?
The buyer, oh my gosh, real estate right now with everything going on. I mean, your buyers are being hammered with interest rates and pricing galore. Now you're going to hammer them with that you're going to kill an economy. I don't see that being great for a housing market up here.
Transfer tax on real estate.
Mhm. Yep.
Is it? Okay.
Take it, give it a shot.
Oh, no, I'm just asking questions. That's what
No,
we do
same,
here, right?
but, like-
We ask questions on certain things and.
But like, thank
and
you for that, because that's where I think the problem lies here with this 1.5% is you're not gonna get, nobody wants to cut fire, police, safety, anything. Like, I'm with everybody. You might as well just take it off in this town. It's not gonna happen. The only way to bail us out of this is gonna be a tax increase when you look at this scenario. So it's gonna happen regardless. It's gonna have to. If you up it 1.5%, the town's gonna wanna know what's gonna go in place and what strategic plan is there in place. So, because this is not gonna sustain us forever.
Yeah.
So like you just said, there has to be something in place for the citizens here before they vote on that in November, if that hit the ballot. I'm not gonna check yes until I know there's something in place to take care of that over the long run.
That's a great point.
Which
Yep.
is building and all of that. And then the second part of that question I had was, like Justin had talked on it, I'm with you. I thought we had a $50 million surplus and we were one of the best cities. So to hear you, I want to kind of go back to what you said a little bit ago. We had a $50 million surplus and everybody's great. We're building, we're maintaining everything. How all of a sudden does somebody else look at numbers and go, well, we have a $7,000 or $7 million deficit?
Anybody want to explain it's the diff, right? We were borrowing from the diff to the extent where we didn't have the money.
I guess in layman's terms, how do I look at the savings account and it's got $50 million and all of a sudden this month I don't have money to pay bills and I'm putting $7 million on a credit card?
Let me take a quick shot in plain language, and then our finance director can confuse everyone with technical information. Right? So one of the things that the city did over the years as we built infrastructure, you know, typically development pays development impact fees as they're built. Those fees go into development impact fee or DIF funds, and then from those funds you build needed infrastructure. Well, the city strategy was, well, we've got general fund money sitting there. Let's build infrastructure now and stimulate economic growth with it. So the city lent general fund money to the DIF funds over the years. The DIF funds built projects. We built projects out of the DIF funds, right? But you got to the point where the DIF funds owed tens of millions of dollars to the general fund. When you look at a balance sheet, and this is where, Phil, you might want to jump in and correct my terminology, but when you look at the balance sheet for the general fund, monies owed to the general fund appear as though it's money in that account, right? Because it's monies owed to it, right? But in the case of the monies owed to it, that's not cash actually sitting in the bank. It's an asset in that it's money that's owed to the general fund. But the problem is the development didn't occur at the rate that the city had hoped at the time, and so those projects weren't happening. The DIF money wasn't being collected as quickly, and so now we're still in a position where we're $25 million still, Phil, owed to the general fund from DIF funds, and it could be a very long time before that would ever be recouped. So I think, as a member of the public or even a member of the council, you're given this huge budget book, and what you're really looking at is that balance sheet. And is the general fund balanced? Yes, it's balanced, okay, but it's balanced. It needs a more thorough explanation. It's balanced because we're showing all this money that's owed to it. It's not actual cash in the bank.
Our build-out. Yeah. Our build-out will have $50 million in surplus. One day, we'll be really rich.
Yeah.
Not today.
To try to oversimplify, this is one of those cases where two things can be true. In the general fund, there's a significant reserve, especially the old way of accounting for it. It's true, there was a significant reserve in the general fund. It's also true that if you looked outside the general fund, there was a massive deficit in the DIF funds. And so if you combine them together, there's not a massive deficit and there's not a massive reserve. It's a reserve that we're running out of quickly. And so all of those things are true depending on if you slice it up. And we didn't come up with anything special. We just said, hey, it's confusing to slice it all up. Let's bring them all back together. And the picture, we think it gets a little more clear. It's not new information, it's just through a different lens.
So moving forward, this issue isn't going to happen again, I guess is what I'm getting at.
For the issue to happen again would be poor management. And so as part of what we're working with the community on is what's the service levels that are wanted by the community? Let's set up a funding plan for that, and let's build a long-term plan to make sure that we never have to meet in the white back again. It's a great facility, Megan, but yeah, so part of this is what is the long-term financial plan to make sure that we deal with them once and they go away.
Gotcha. So to recap, that's something I think needs to be put out to the public before that 1.5 or 1% increase goes in.
Joe? You hear that, Joe? All right. Mr. Sartison.
The good old kicking the can down the road. I like that. We're going to stop doing that.
That's right.
Okay, it looks like I'm about to close the meeting tonight. Council members, thank you for providing this outreach to the community. However, I have a little criticism of how this was handled. I have a few illustrations here I'd like to show you. On February 16th, the News Mirror had an ad for the community meeting here about the wine country specific plan. It was nice and colorful, very well displayed for everybody, okay? Told what we needed to do. And then when you had the council meeting to vote on that, you had a classified display ad, which was still pretty much appropriate. Easy for people to find in the paper. For today's meeting, there was a display ad in last Friday's News Mirror mixed in with the high school photographs of the great graduation. Everybody's proud of our graduates here. I've had daughters who graduated years ago. This is what that ad looked like. Very difficult for people to find in the paper. I've talked to people over the weekend about this. A lot of people didn't even know about that ad. It's not the type of ad that's typically in the paper. I assume it was put together by our public information officer at his request to do a black background display ad, which was not in the best interest of reaching out to into the community. Second of all, the website, fixit.gov, Financial Fixit on the city website, a lot of people didn't know about that. I discovered it over the weekend. I printed it off. I did my own little survey just to see how it would work. I came up with about $8.5 million. Nothing that I would stand by completely, but I wanted to do that. We need to reach out to the bigger community. Most of us here tonight, you've seen month after month after month for the last year. I would guess to say over 50%, if not more, of the people that came here are people like myself that come and address you about various issues, some not so pleasant for you, I understand that. It must be a relief to be able to have this kind of interaction. I'm almost in my 3 minutes because I don't like to go over, Mayor. But I think we really need to, the importance of this financial situation for our city is so important that we need to do a better outreach. And whether it's providing something like this has a lot of explanation in here that Mr. Mann has done, Mr. White has provided. A lot of it is here in the text, besides the little survey you can take and check your own type of items that you would support. And I really urge the council and the staff to continue this dialogue, but hopefully try to do a little better outreach. I spent Father's Day afternoon with my two daughters here in Yucaipa, and one of them received I believe, a text message survey. The other one had not heard about it. There's a lot of younger, middle-aged people probably that aren't following things easily, but it will impact them. And the last thing I want to say is tomorrow I'm going to a high school reunion luncheon in the city of Duarte. And the sales tax at the old spaghetti factory there on our meal is 10.25%. A lot of LA County cities are well above 9, close to 10.
Yeah.
And I really feel that the community here, if it's presented right, would support maybe the minimum sales tax, the 1%, if it's provided, you know, the information that everybody needs more than us here tonight. So my point is really to continue the dialogue and maybe come up with a little more outreach, Mr. POI, PIO, and keep going. We really need to keep going because we all have a vested interest in dealing with this issue. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am?
I'll be quick. Kim Shapiro, I live on the North Bench. I appreciate you guys taking the time to give us this information tonight. I came here with emotional responses to this financial fix-it thing, because the information that is on there is not enough information. If you click the little I button, you get a few things that some tell you a little bit of information that's good, like the police one. It tells you if you take one deputy away, there's only 26, so you're taking a substantial portion if you take one away. So you can understand that. If you look at the YPAC and the community center and the STARS and the teen programs, it just says you're cutting things. It doesn't tell us what types of programs you're cutting. If you don't know, you don't know. You might not be vested in it. I don't have any teens right now, but I want the teens to have programs because I don't want them to have nothing to do so that they become little hoodlums and become a police problem. So I want the teen programs, but I don't know what teen programs we have. I don't know if there's one teen program or 27 teen programs. I don't know. I can't make an informed decision because I don't have the information. I don't have the time to research it all myself. I work full-time and then some. But city people know this. So can we get more information on those little buttons when you push them? Because people that are going to be looking at this are not the people that are in this room tonight. You have a few people that showed up, and they're the few people that show up for most of your things, like the last gentleman said. You get the core people that show up, but there's 55,000 people in this city. You didn't have 100 people in this room tonight, I don't think, if you took out all of the city people that are paid to be here. When I first came in, I counted 51 people, not including the front row or you people up front. So you need to get this information out to the people that aren't here and get information, how do they feel? Because if you want a tax to pass on a vote, people have to know what it is and know that it's not just a sales tax, it's a transitional use tax that doesn't affect your groceries, doesn't affect your prescriptions, doesn't affect grandma, most of grandma's things, and you should be paying for her dinner if you take her out.
Damn right.
You should also be helping to pay for her groceries, because probably the delivery fee you might have to help with.
Yes, ma'am.
So more information needs to get out to people, because people are going to read this and they're going to make an emotional decision. They're not going to make a smart decision. They're not going to have the information that was tonight. I'm sure you guys probably maybe recorded this, and this information might be available, but some of the slides tonight were informational, but there's not enough information on there for somebody just looking at this thing to make the decisions that you want them to make. More information needs to go out. You need more communication with your constituents, and you need to put more information on that if you want people to get a good, real feeling if people are going to support the taxes that you want to institute. Because if you just look at a sales tax, hell no, I'm not going to vote for that.
Yeah.
I don't care about the marijuana dispensaries. I'll vote. You can have that. But I also don't think you're going to get $1.5 million out of two or three dispensaries in this town. I don't think that's going to produce $1.5 million in a year.
I think the sales from just Mary alone might do that, it sounds like.
I think I know why your jams and jellies are so addicting now. I have some jelly. I want some more jelly. I want some Captain Crunch.
So that's all, just more information, put it out there. I mean, don't overwhelm, don't put, 37 volumes in each one of those, but some more real number information where people can understand it in layman's terms so that we know what's going on. And I agree with this gentleman over here also. We need to know that this isn't going to be a continual thing. You need to really look at how we fix this. Don't go on an IOU that we're being funded. The general fund has a lot of money because we have an IOU. And I hope that $4 million that was loaned, we have a lien on the property so that if the guy goes bankrupt, we at least have the land or something, because that's really good as long as he doesn't run out of money.
Yep. Next question.
One more question here. Colleen already went, sir.
Hi, I'm Chuck. I've been in Yucaipa since 1956. I like what she said about more information. Is that going?
Yep.
More information. I've been in marketing an awful long time, and there is a lot of missing information that needs to get out to the general public. I think that would be a worthwhile effort to really do that. I think I hate sales tax. I hate them. But it sounds to me like either the 1% or the 1.5 is our fix. And I hope that's not kicking it down the road fix, because we definitely need to tie spending to income. It's just like the other young lady said, your budget's no different than my household budget. You live beyond your means, you get to this mess. You use your credit card too much, you get to this mess. There are a couple of points. If we end up not getting the sales tax and we have to start making cuts, I hate the idea of cutting payroll for people. That's punitive to them, to those few. Even Chris, he volunteered, but it's still punitive. They didn't create this mess. They don't need to pay for it out of their pockets by cutting. If anything, you could freeze the hiring, and by attrition, if a person leaves a job, spread that workload out to others, and you could still save money. Give the others that are taking that responsibility, the workload, give them a raise. The raise shouldn't, between all of them, shouldn't equal more than the position that was eliminated. So you're still savings. You guys, it sounds to me the whole theme, or a large part of it, is the cart before the horse. We've been with the cart before the horse now, I guess, for a while. I'm hoping that we have a yearly audit so that we don't get in this mess again, and not as a distrust, but as just a prudent thing to do. It sounds to me like Ray Casey cooked the books. I'll say it. It doesn't sound like everything was above the board there. If we went from, 50 million, I never heard that amount. I heard 10 million surplus in the piggy bank to, now we're in 10 million deficit. So something doesn't add up there. I am vehemently against the big box stores. I think that we could fix all of this without the added revenue. Mr. Mayor, you said that we have an increased income for the city, but with all of the housing projects that have been built over the last 20 years, none of that is considered income?
I mean, property tax. You know what you're talking about?
That's the income, right?
Let me
that's where most of our city's income comes from.
So there's an explanation.
Okay. But I have more. Go ahead.
So yes, when property is developed as residential, the city does see a bump in property tax revenue from that property. However, we know that long-term, the cost of providing services to residents is always greater than the revenue generated by the house. So housing is always a net cost drain. There are some exceptions. In very expensive areas where we have very, very high-end homes, higher than anything we have here in Yucaipa, that might not be the case. But generally speaking, housing is always more expensive to provide services for long-term than the revenue they produce.
Usually, for an example, and it's a little bit different because we contract our public safety, but in my city that I work in, whenever there's a large development, it's required that staffing for police and fire go up as well. It's just built into it.
Which brings me to my next point. Why don't we do that? Why don't we require Melrose or something similar for all major housing, apartments, and major business buildings and the warehouses to include our infrastructure?
And that is something that, on a staff level anyway, I have asked that moving forward, all new housing development projects come with a CFD to provide for maintenance of the streets and public safety, so that new development pays for itself, as opposed to those costs being borne by all of the existing residents when new projects.
And that hasn't been happening up until this point?
I think there are some exceptions, for example, Chapman Heights, but by and large, no, that has not been happening.
So that needs to be part of the, whatever you want to call it, city charter or whatever, that any kind of new development has to sustain itself, basically. And including with that, if the warehouses go in, the infrastructure that is going to need to be maintained by them should be included in their added tax or whatever you want to call it. And I would hope that most of the roadway infrastructure would be done as those buildings are being built, not after, because then you're closing down half the road and you're pissing people off. It should be done as that construction is being done so that it's all done at the same time.
And Chuck, that discussion's been had as well. After the In-N-Out Chick-fil-A Corky's and the Avenue E and Yucaipa Boulevard, like debacle, where traffic was a nightmare because the businesses were there, but the infrastructure really wasn't there to support it. That has been the instruction that your council has given staff is, let's make sure the infrastructure can support the build, not the other way around.
So we're learning as we go?
Yeah.
Okay. Don't start anything new without clear finances for it. And that includes future costs for it, like the YPAC here. Chris, you said this is an asset to the community. It's not really an asset yet. We're still paying for it through the nose.
Well,
It's an asset in the aspect that it's nice to look at, and it does add to the community, I don't know, flavor, but it's not really an asset yet.
So for years, if you look at the first slide from the city's incorporation till 2007, I would say, that's what they did. Our city electeds and their city administration of the past, we wanted a city hall. We didn't want trailers forever. Let's save for it. Save. Build city hall. What happened when we got a new city hall? Anybody remember?
I don't.
Our city manager retired. Our city leadership left. Things changed.
They do.
Following that point, and I remember because that's when I left the city as an explorer and became a deputy somewhere else, new city administration, new city leadership, new change in direction of the way we do business. Let's build. Let's borrow from the diff. Well, or let's lend to the diff or vice versa, whatever. We're going to take money and build with it, even though we don't have the money, because it'll pay off in the long run, and it probably will.
So we're not going to do that anymore, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. The warehouse tax, I was led to believe that one warehouse that's already built, it's not occupied yet, will generate more tax revenue than all of our gas stations and liquor stores combined. So when will we see that?
Chris?
Wow, that is optimistic. So, we'll get a property tax bump. If the tenant ends up being point of sale, which we don't control, that's, they build these things on spec and the owner negotiates, who the tenant's going to be, that could be significant revenue to the city. That project and the project that's in the pipeline that we talked about, those two projects combined probably be about $1 million a year of property tax to the city. Again, if a point of sale tenant ends up going in any one of those, it could be millions of dollars of revenue for the city, but there's no way for us to control that.
You can't gamble on that.
Right.
Right. I would appreciate the city council not gambling our money anymore. The tax, the way that you were explaining it with Amazon, buying from Amazon, will that be included in that sales tax? Anything that we buy online, is that going to be part of that 1%?
Correct. So when a city adopts a city sales tax, it applies to that city portion, the city sales tax. So in this case, let's say 1%. That 1% would apply to all sales within the jurisdiction, but also anything that is purchased online that is delivered into the city. So Amazon, Walmart.com, Home Depot, any online. It also applies to vehicle sales purchased outside the city and boats, RVs.
So when I buy a new car outside the city, it still will apply?
Yeah, so currently.
To that 1.5?
Yes.
Or 1% tax will be given to Yucaipa?
Correct.
Okay. So on the Amazon tax, you could probably bump that up to 7 million the way my wife orders. So
I do think it's a conservative estimate. Yeah, this
Yeah.
came from our sales tax consultant, HDL. It's very easy for them to calculate what the revenue from brick and mortar sales will be because they can look at our existing sales and, but, the online sales is an estimate. It's a conservative estimate. So I think the $6 million number on the 1 cent probably will end up being higher.
I hope so. A lot of you, or a few of you, a couple of you, one of you, scoffed at some of the smaller cuts, and I think that any cut matters. Any savings matters in the big picture. They all add up. And with that, the volunteerism came up. And you mentioned there's all kinds of volunteer opportunities out there. Well, I think the people concerned about volunteers is how it would save the city money. In other words, say somebody from the Parks Department or whatever, they quit, they left their job or whatever, put out a call for volunteers instead of filling that position. I don't know what that position would pay per year, but, pennies equal dollars, dollars equals hundreds. Things like that. It doesn't make sense to scoff at any savings at all at this point. There's a lot of money that we can save, and it all adds up. No cuts on anything remotely tied to safety and law enforcement, I would say. This tax, as I understand it, you're saying the 1% or the 1.5 is only going to kick this can down the road?
Well, no, I don't think we're saying that. I think whatever the fix is here ultimately in terms of revenue and or cutting, once we get the budget back to structural balance, we need to make sure we keep it there. Right? So I think what Phil was talking about was we need to put a mechanism in place that ties cost increases to revenue increases. It's easier said than done because some cost increases are not entirely within our control. So for example, we don't control how much a deputy gets paid or a firefighter. So
I understand that,
right.
So that means we have to have a piggy bank to cover that.
Right. So, I think the concept is once we solve this problem for today, we got to make sure that our spending stays underneath growth of revenue long term.
Right. So you say that's easier said than done, but it's doable. When and how can we do that?
Well, I think focusing on economic development is important so that our revenue continues to grow over time. That's one thing. I think another thing is that we have to understand if we're going to be committed to that principle, that means we may, in a fiscal year, be faced with tough decisions in terms of our spending, right? And that may mean if we have a year where the sheriff's contract increases $2 million, we may have to say, do we want to stick to that principle or do we want to adjust that contract, right? Do we want to adjust how many deputies are on that contract? We can't control what the price tag is for a deputy. We can only control how many deputies we have, right? That's an example.
And Chuck, you said something that you're against big box stores. And I'm against big box stores too on the corner of Bryant and Oakland Road and Yucaipa Boulevard and Bryant and 4th and Yucaipa Boulevard. I don't know what's rural about the 10 freeway. I don't see it. It's not. It's the busiest stretch of highway in the nation. It's not rural even a little bit.
That's exactly the point. And it's going to get even busier with all of these big box stores, and everybody's going to start complaining about being able to get in and out of town because of the added traffic, unless we can get Caltrans to work with us and make the freeway wider instead of just
But that's what we anticipate with the added interchange at Wildwood Canyon Road. It will alleviate traffic on the freeway. That was a study that they came and said, look, you put an interchange here, here's what the rush hour looks like, and it's not congested because it's an added interchange. People are getting on and off at different places.
and then you're going to add more houses, and it's going to outlive that interchange.
Yeah.
So something has to.
At build-out, again, we need to know, at build-out, Yucaipa is going to have 80,000 residents. So we're going to have 20,000 more people in our city anyways. We have to adjust for that as well. But we
Yeah.
also have to adjust for how we're going to pay for that, because it's going to cost more money. That's why if we have to get the revenue, not just by a tax. We have to find a way to, and Measure O failed. We didn't have box stores on the freeway. Now this is where we're at. We are a city that wants to have nice things, but we don't want to pay for it because we don't want to have to look at a big box store. We don't want to have a warehouse because it's horrible to
Well,
look
like
at.
I said, I've been here since 1956. I don't need any more nice things. I know everybody else does.
No. I'm talking about when you call 911, it's nice to have a deputy show up, right? That's a nice
No,
thing to
that-
have.
that's
That's
off
what. But my analogy, the nice thing, is a very safe city. That's a nice thing.
It is.
Right. We want to have the nice things. We have to want to pay for it too. And paying for it means maybe instead of having a 1.5% tax discussion, the discussion was had 24 years ago that maybe we should put a box store on the freeway that'll generate more than that in tax revenue. But we didn't do it. We said, no, we don't want it. Beaumont has it. Redlands has it. We'll stay where we are. We'll stay small town. That's fine. But we didn't stay small town. We grew. Our population went through the roof. Crime went up. Sacramento didn't help. They're releasing inmates at record numbers. So this council said we need to have more deputies. We need to have a safer city.
Cart before the horse.
Right? We don't have the revenue to pay for the safety, but we want the safety. But we don't want big box stores to help pay for it. What are we going to have? Copper Kettle Cafe is not going to support 3 more deputies on the tax revenue they
Well,
produce.
the reason we're in this predicament is because we've been outspending.
Yeah. We've also been out generating revenue, and we're not there. We don't have the money. And it's not just our spending. Again, the deputy sheriffs get paid because the county gives them a raise.
It's not just about the deputy sheriffs, though.
Where do you see the ridiculous spending that we need to stop spending? Tell
It's
me.
not just ridiculous spending, it's all of the overspending.
But it's, okay, again, from my...
If we're not overspending, and I could be wrong, okay?
That's
because
what
I don't know, then how did we get in this mess?
This is what it costs to have a city. It costs this much money to have a city of this size with this many roads and this service. That's what it costs. Again, it was reckless of us and kind of, we had 209 miles of road and we didn't have a roads crew. We had, what was 7 guys? 7 guys, 7 men. And we said, you're responsible for all things public works in the city, all parks, streets, sidewalks, weed eating, lawn mowing, all of it. Plumbing issues at City Hall, everything. Do we need to increase spending? Yeah, because it costs that much. We need that many people to run the city. And then we said, we're going to build more. We're going to build a community center with amazing landscape and a white pack that requires a frigid air conditioning to make us all freezing, right? We're going to have all these things. So yeah, we spent money because that's what people, it wasn't, I remember this one. I wasn't on the council. I remember the city going out and saying, what do we need? What does Yucaipa want? We want a performing arts. We want to really embody the performing arts and see how we can do that. And they're like, oh, we'll build a YPAC because that's what the city wants. We want a better senior center. It costs money. We want a library. So we're spending money at the direction of our constituents because that's what they want. Maybe not everybody unanimously, but by and large. And it costs money to do that. In order to have the money, in order to have the nice things, we have to have revenue. And it's either a tax, cannabis. We shouldn't have been subsidizing essentially the waste management for the last 30 years. That's what it costs. They're wear and tear on our roads, and the city government said, we'll cover it. Don't worry about it, citizens. We got you. Well, why? I don't want to live off the government. Thank you very much. I'll pay my fair share. If that's what it costs for my trash to be picked up every Monday, then I'll pay the extra $7. Or I'll move to San Bernardino and let the government pay for everything for me in a very welfare state. It costs money to have nice things. And our city is nice. And it's either going to, we have to get more money to keep it nice, or we lose the niceness. That's the only thing. I wasn't scoffing at the cuts. I was scoffing at what the pennies and savings would represent, because it's not just a reduction of pay. I know what that means. I left the sheriff's department because of it. You're going to pay me less to do the same job? I'll go find somewhere else. I'm not going to. Why? Why would I stay in Yucaipa? I value myself more than you value me. I'm going to go find it somewhere else. So then we lose our public works. And then the people we do hire are not worthy of working in Yucaipa. We see what happens when Memphis PD defunds the police to the point where everybody leaves. Then they hire 5 thugs and call them police officers who beat the bejesus out of somebody until they die because they know no business being a cop. So, yeah, we have competitive salaries because we want to have good employees that really value our city, that don't embezzle $300,000 or whatever it was from our city coffers.
So I know it's not your fault, this panel's fault, but still overspending prior to these years, and we need to fix that. We need to tie the spending to the income of the community.
You're absolutely right, yes.
And that's all I'm saying.
Okay.
And that needs to be part of the city charter, that we cannot spend more than we bring in.
Understood.
It's hard to be a parent and say, no, you can't have that piece of candy because we can't afford it. But that's what has to happen.
You're right.
We can't spend more than we make.
Right. And you're right.
Bottom line.
You asked the question is, are we going to rectify in the future? Are we going to stop building first for the money that's promised later? And the answer is, from my seat, yeah. Do we have the money in the bank to fund the project? Stop putting it on the credit card, right? Stop putting the lavish vacation on the credit card because it's going to catch up. Stop building first and not having the revenue support it. I see it. I think I speak for the rest of the gentlemen up here. I know that that's the direction we're going to give our city manager, or at least I will. And we can rely on our community to come out and force and hold us accountable.
So if we do the 1% or the 1.5, I don't know which one you're thinking. I think you're shooting for the 1.5. That's what's been mentioned most. Selling that to the community is paramount.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how you're going to do that. I've been in marketing a long time, and that's going to be a hard sell.
Chuck,
Let me
real quick. The community has to know we have zero authority to levy the tax. We can't make you give us more money. The only thing we can do is reduce the service. And if that's what the city wants, if our bosses say you're not getting a cent more, cut, you saw it. Every single cut still didn't get us where we needed to be.
So let's have the information officer, whatever he's called, write something up that is totally transparent, that lays it on the line for the community and put it in the paper. And go off of that. It's all about marketing. It's how you present it. Mm-hmm. And being truthful about what we need to get out of this mess is the best form of action.
Yeah.
Oh,
True.
right.
Exactly.
Yes.
Good point.
I'm gonna stop there,
like
Chuck.
One more thing. I just like the way that goes. I hate taxes, but if we can get it before the county gets it,
at least it stays here.
Then we need to do it.
Yeah.
Chris?
Chuck, you made a number of good points, and a number of the speakers tonight talked about.
Colleen, we're done with you. You already spoke, ma'am. Go ahead, Chris.
A number of the speakers tonight talked about the importance of the city getting the information out, and that hit home, and you're right. We have to be careful because if the council votes to place a tax measure on the ballot, the city cannot legally advocate for that measure. We can educate. And our city attorney has, he will try to keep us in line, but Fair Political Practice Commission defines very broadly what they consider advocacy, so we have to walk a line there. That being said, if the council votes to place a measure on the ballot, we need to be prepared that there will have to be an education effort that we'll have to make an investment in to make sure the community understands, because I think our responsibility is to make sure that the facts and the choice is clear, right?
You don't have to advocate it. You have a lot of advocates here for it,
Yeah.
but the information getting out there in a truthful
Yes.
fashion is an educational thing.
Yes, you're right. You're right.
And I would. And I'm going to tell you now, from my position, I'm going to lean heavily on our sheriff's union, on our fire union to help educate people. They understand what public safety is and how this is going to be helpful. And I'm telling you, I'm a union man myself in that regard, and that's what my job was as a union man, to help educate the city as to what this means from my seat, what a tax measure does for the city. Thank you. All right, I think we're,
Can I add one thing to that discussion?
sure.
Based on what I'm hearing from Chuck and some of the other speakers, there was a sense of frustration on the accountability of how do we know we're not going to get back to where we are now? What happened in the past? Why didn't we know before? I mentioned a long-term financial plan. Kind of the next step up from the long-term financial plan is an overall city strategy, a strategic plan, where council would say, as a city, this is what we want Yucaipa to look like. This is what the residents expect from the government. This is how we're going to control these things, including the long-term financial plan. And that's kind of a missing component that we haven't had in the past to say, how do we know we're not gonna? Because we have a strategic plan, and if we were not to follow that, it would be outside of our strategic plan. And so that would be the governing document to say, that's how we know we're not gonna do it, because we've got a strategy, it's written, and everything, all the decisions are gonna line up with our strategy, so.
Perfect. 3 hours and 40 minutes of a discussion for us to talk about this, folks. This is, again, you're right. And 3.5 years that I've been on the council, and longer than I've been watching the city council, I haven't seen this done, so I'm glad it's happening. If this would have happened in 2020, that tax measure may have been more successful. I think I probably still would have voted no, because it didn't, you say you're fine, you say you're healthy, you say you have millions in the bank, but you want more? No, I'm not buying it. And then you want to put it in general fund? No, I'm not buying it. Well, I think the answer to some of these questions is, why was there such a rush to do the wine country specific plan? Well, because there's revenue tied to it. And we didn't see the need for the rush because we have revenue. We have a surplus. Well, because I think people who were looking from a 30,000-foot level saw that there was not such green pastures on the horizon. So we're here now. We're transparent. The numbers are where they're at. At the end of the day, the citizens of Yucaipa, have to decide which direction you want us to go in. If it means that we have a very clear, concise marching orders with some additional revenue, then we'll move that way. And if it's, no, I tighten the belt, you tighten the belt, then we tighten the belt. But that's the way it looks. And it's not fun, but it is what it is. I said it in jest earlier. It's numbers. I'm not good at them, but I get it. You need money or numbers in the black and not in the red. It's pretty easy. So, anybody from my left or right have anything more? Questions, comments? Councilman Duncan?
So this is a study session, right? Well, just wanted to catch Kevin Miskin before he left the building, but he said he didn't like cannabis. And bottom line is, there are at least 6 companies outside of Yucaipa that deliver to Yucaipa every day, and the city of Yucaipa is not getting the revenue catch from that. And that's happening even whether we like it or not. And when we had the discussion about medical cannabis, I was the biggest objector to it. I objected to it vehemently because of my teenage years when I lived a wilder life. But I was surprised at how many seniors use cannabis. They don't smoke pot, but they take gummies, and it's got strong THC content. And I was also surprised at how many respectable people that live in Yucaipa use cannabis. And you all would never know it unless you ask and they were honest about it. But after I got through that whole medical marijuana thing, I asked a lot of my friends and a lot of people I respected, and I was shocked at how many people use pot. I'll just say that in closing.
Councilman Thorpe? I have nothing right now. Councilman Garner?
Well, I'm for the 1.5% sales tax, but I will not support it unless 100% of that goes to public safety.
Mr. Mayor, that opens a whole nother discussion. Not tonight, I heard, not tonight. Then not tonight, but there are legal differences between a general tax and a special tax. General tax requires 50% plus 1 vote. Special tax requires 2/3. Right? So I think what this council will have to weigh is, look, our polling consultant, every race we've looked at in the last couple of cycles, we just do not get to 2/3, right? And so I think that's something that we need to be very honest with the community about, is if we can do a general tax and we can say, look, this is primarily to support public safety, and it is, because public safety is the vast majority of what we spend money on. But I think we need to be honest with the community and not pretend like we're doing a general tax, but really it's public safety, wink, wink. But you know, I think we're going to have to be honest. Now, the council can pass a resolution that says our intent is that all revenue from this sales tax goes to public safety, and we can do that. But that's not truly a dedication, because at any point in the future, a future council could pass a resolution to reverse that, right? So I think one of the issues that was had in the last measure was that council said, okay, we know we're not going to get to 2/3, so we're gonna have to run this as a general tax, but we're going to tell people really it's for public safety. And I think a lot of the public thought city was trying to pull a fast one on them, right? I think it's probably better just to be upfront that, listen, yeah, primarily this is going to go to public safety because that's mostly what we spend money on, but it's a general tax. We can also spend it on roads, we can spend it on the senior center, and, you know, it goes into the pot to provide city services across the board, which the vast majority of what that is public safety, right? Just my thoughts after having talked with the polling firm. If you go back to the March election of this year, the good news is there were quite a few tax measures on the ballot in Riverside and San Bernardino counties, in both counties. The vast majority of them passed, all but maybe 2 of them passed. Not one of them got to 2/3, right? Even in conservative communities, a general tax, you know, can get to 50% plus 1, right? So it's a discussion not for tonight. It's a discussion, something we'll have to think about, but there are realities here we have to deal with.
Mayor Pro Tem Venable.
You know, I was against cannabis forever, too. I was a jock in high school, and it was just not into my thing. And then my mom came down with cancer. And if you know me, I'm 6'5", 300 pounds, and my mom was 4'10", and she got down to about 89 pounds. And we started feeding her brownies in the morning. And by lunchtime, we were eating doubles. And she gained a lot of her weight back and stuff, and I got to keep her for another 2 years. So it's it touches my heart with that. If it's done right, I think that it could be a great thing. But there's my story. So I'm going to be putting a lot of pressure on Mr. Miller to bring in more business here, whether it's a Whole Foods or a Trader Joe's, to keep our money flow coming. And I think that the pressure is going to be on the city and us to make sure that the 1.5 is keeping us going and bringing us more business here that's smart for Yucaipa.
This was not a meeting for us to make a decision. This was a study session, so thank you for coming and studying with us. I appreciate it. Please drive safe, be safe, and we will see you next week at our regular city council meeting at City Hall, 6 o'clock. Thanks.